everybody! Welcome to Playbook by Laserforce Loveland. This podcast is a platform for laser tag players to geek out about strategies, stories, and ongoings in the Laserforce scene, and for you to join us as another player at the table. My codename is Mischief. I'm a player from Loveland, Colorado, who loves to talk about tag. Tonight, I'm joined by Odin's Fist from Sacramento, California. Welcome back, Odin.
Hello.
How the heck are ya, you random draw champion?
I'm good.
Feel good to be a winner.
Played a random draw tournament. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels all right.
How does a random draw first place trophy feel compared to a neutral site international's first place trophy?
Well, this one is a little bigger.
Oh, really?
So it feels a little larger. So that's cool.
They give you bigger trophies at random draws.
Yeah.
Or do they give you bigger trophies at Syracuse?
Oh yeah, well, Syracuse does like trophies, so it might be a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, you know.
Okay, I see. So I'm hearing it's probably just higher probability you can win a random draw and more worth the effort anyway because you get a bigger trophy. So
true.
Cool. All right, so tonight we are discussing player evaluation. How do you value a player? How good are they? How can you tell if a player is good at laser tag? The reason that we're talking about this is we most recently, as a scene, we had a random draw tournament take place in Syracuse, New York. And the way they organized the teams was they divided all 36 players into 6 tiers of player evaluation. The A tier was the best. The F tier was the quote unquote worst at the game. And then they had one player from each tier onto different teams. And of course, you can't get all predictions perfect, but we had some widely ranged results and some players who may not have been put in the right tiers. So we wanted to talk about how on earth do you accurately tell a player's worth anyways? I should have given you more of a segue. Odin, your team took first place. You had the same, tier structure as everybody else, and yet your team turned out pretty dominant throughout the tournament, even when your top 2 players were consistently put on resupply. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience at Random Draw?
Yeah. So to start with, I actually have a lot of experience playing random draws. I've played every one that there has been in the United States since I started playing laser tag, and I love them.
How random?
Yeah, how random? Very random. The positions and everything, even. Yeah, but so, I think one of the big challenges of ranking players for random draws is just a lack of information, because, and as I'll talk about later on, you don't really have extensive information on a lot of these players, like beyond basic stats from members nights. If you have those, some players like Ender didn't even have stats to go off of, but beyond that, you usually don't have a lot of ability to watch these players in action in order to properly rank them and evaluate them, which is a struggle. And another thing is that a random draw is a different type of event with a different style of play than something like a nationals. And so the same qualities that might make a player more valuable at nationals might not be the same qualities that you're looking for in a random draw player in order for them to bring more value. For example, somebody who can only play commander but plays it very well might do well on a structured team where they can play commander every game, versus in a random draw, they have a chance of not pulling commander ever, potentially, or pulling it only a couple of times, and so they might not be as valuable.
Yeah, that's definitely a true part of this. So we want to discuss what makes a player valuable. Before we get into it, so your team, and I'm trying to, can you name off the people on your random draw team?
Yeah, so it was myself, Odin's Fist. It was Kodama, Assassin, Stealth Elf, Alex Boxes, and Ender. And
what was it like to play on that team? Tell me more about it.
It was great actually, and I knew all those players except for Stealth Elf from playing with them previously, and it was funny. I actually texted Kodama because he didn't arrive to the tournament until late on day one, and so I texted him about the team, and we immediately were like, "Oh, great! Like we're stoked! Like this is going to be a good tournament." Um, because uh, all of those players have like really solid fundamentals. And so while they may not like always be like as flashy as other players, like Alex Boxes isn't like renowned throughout the scene for being like some big playmaker and stuff. We knew that he had really solid fundamentals and he could play laser tag and understood the positions and was a good listener. Like he was very good at like, hey, we need this done, and he would really register it and be like, all right, got it. Like I can focus on that. And Ender had no tournament experience, very little experience, even like actually playing with the rules, being a San Marcos player. But we had played with him before, and
that was the most subtle jab at San Marcos you could possibly imagine.
And we knew he was a very solid player. He's very capable of playing the game.
He was from San Marcos, so we knew he was going to cheat the heck out of this tournament.
He was great, actually. But he's also somebody that I knew thinks about the game, right? Like he actually puts a lot of thought into like what he's supposed to be doing and what things work and what things don't, rather than, some people, especially before entering the tournament scene, will kind of just play on instinct and just kind of shoot people and do whatever feels right. But in a random draw setting, you really want to kind of like minimize the work that you have to do, because you're not a fully structured team that's been practicing a year leading up to Nets, And so really, if you could just work on like one thing, that's great. And so our thing for this event was just communication. Like all event long, we're like, all right, communication, guys, like let's just pick the communication up. That's like the one thing we want to focus on, and everything else kind of fell into place. And it was just great to have a team where you could just focus on one thing, right? Like we have one identifiable issue that we can focus on, and it will elevate our game enough to allow us to like keep winning and keep on our trajectory to finish first. I'm very grateful for that. And so I think that's kind of one of the big things that is underestimated in random draws, is that fundamental skill, that like very baseline ability to play the game no matter where you are or what you have to do, being able to go in and fill the role, versus players who might be crazy strong attackers but might be lacking in some other areas, or might struggle with working with the team or filling different roles or being adaptable.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes total sense to me why your team was so strong. As I've ranted about previously, the players change based on where they're placed, what structures around them, what tournament is it, what role are they asking to play, and what team are they being asked to play against. There are so many things that change a player's value, and this seemed like a great situation for all of them. And if any of those other players had been on a different team, they might have performed quite differently.
Yeah, and I think the nice thing too was that Kodama and I very frequently rolled Resupply. It was just Resupply and Scout pretty much. In all of round play, I think we each had only 4 games on a 3-hit position, and never together. So we never really had a like quote unquote strongest in the field lineup. But with a team with such a solid foundation, like our lowest tier player was Ender, and Ender played phenomenal. Ender played, tiers above where he was placed. And with such a strong foundation, it was really easy for Kodama and I to kind of help navigate the team and create scenarios that were favorable to them, so that they could kind of play in their element. And that was something that we focused on a lot. And then our lows were not very low. Our worst case scenario, our worst games, we were usually able to make it very close and very competitive, which meant that we could usually come back for the match, which was also very nice, versus having potentially catastrophic lineups that could lead to devastating losses where you're looking at a 20,000 point deficit that you now have to climb against in order to claim the match. So that was great.
Yeah, definitely. So, gosh, there's so many ways to go with this, but I kind of want to just dive into like how we evaluate players in general. I agree with you completely that depending on what are we ranking them for, seems like it's a really big piece of this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. In every regard, I think that like if I were to come up with a list of the top 5 U.S. players, that list looks different depending on whether I'm talking about a Nats or a random draw or a members night or a duos event. And depending on the environment and what they're expected to do, that list changes quite drastically, I actually would say.
So what is my best tournament, and what kind of event would you place me the highest?
I think that you actually do really well in general in structured Nats environments where you get a lot of practice, where you can build a solid understanding of what your expectations are and what your role is. Because I feel like when you understand your own objective, you're able to pursue that a lot better than something like a members night where there might be this expectation for you to kind of take everything on your shoulders, and communication with the team can fall through and you might not know what your team is wanting of you at any point in the game. I think that is harder for you as a player from my perspective.
You are brilliant. You just had that answer right off the top of your head. A full like mischief portfolio that you just clicked open, and here are all of my strengths and weaknesses. Good job. That is so accurate. I don't have that for you right off the top of my head. I'd have to think about that. I think you do well pretty much everywhere. Because I don't know. I think your mindset shifts completely depending on what event you're in. Like Nats 23, where you famously got to win in a neutral arena. You were given a role where you got to unlock your creativity and innovate the ammo position. That's like one of your greatest strengths, is like you are actively inventing and thinking, how can I break the game? You don't do well when I guess maybe your options are really limited, like any player. But like you definitely function more as part of a larger structure, whether that's a random draw team or a good Nats team. But like if you were ever asked to solo carry, I don't know if that's something that that's not necessarily playing to your strengths. So I think sometimes you can do it.
Yeah, I feel like my mindset is maybe different from a lot of other players, and I don't think it's superior, and I hope it doesn't come off that way.
I think you're superior.
I think that it's actually great to have such an assortment of approaches to the game. And so there's some players who think about like filling a role in their team, and I'm maybe not as good at like pursuing a specific objective, but my approach to the game is I'm very focused on breaking the game down as I'm playing it and figuring out what the possible win condition is. Mm-hmm. And I'm not always the best person for the job to like make it happen, but I feel like in most games, even if like there's a ton of pressure and it feels like we're getting crushed, I feel like I can like see a path, there's a chance here, like these are things that we might be able to do. And so I struggle definitely in like some members night settings and stuff where it's harder to call on your team to like rally them, versus like on the Nats team, it was very easy for me to say, hey guys, we need to be doing this right now, or can you guys do this for me? And we already had an understanding ahead of time of like, we're here for each other, we're committed to like filling in what we need to do, And so I didn't have to be an ammo going around and doing crazy stuff in order to try and flip the game. I had Kodama on Heavy, who I could call on and be like, hey, let's try and do this. I had Caleb on Commander, where I'm like, hey, let's try and create some momentum. And, Snuffles and Thunder on Scouts were if I'm like, hey, I'm hearing that we're having a hard time getting in here, somebody should take the back ramp or something, like having people there who I know that I can rely on and I can ask for help helps me a lot.
Definitely. So I want to just start taking the lead here. I want to get some structure into this episode. We obviously agree player value goes up and down based on the context. So in order for us to actually have this discussion, I think we need to just here's our hypothetical situation as we're going to start talking about how you value a player. You and I are going to draft a team. That team is going to play a members night tonight, and then it's going to play in a random draw, and then it's going to play in a Nats, and then all the players will break up and go into duos. So and then they're going to do whatever else you might think of. Like, they need to run the gauntlet of all the tournaments over the next month. And so we are looking for the best players across the highest amount of variables that we can really realistically think of in our tournament scene. That sound good?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, right. And I'll tell you, I'm going to be putting out a much more extensive deep dive into this because I kind of went off the rails and obsessed over this for a little while. I have a good list of 70, 80 traits and skills that I think are useful. I've got them ranked by how much they actually matter. I've got a bunch of negative traits that people can have, and I went into okay, which skills and traits compound on each other and multiply each other's effectiveness, what are the most relevant skills for a commander, what gets boosted, what isn't so necessary. I went down that whole list, and I really just for the podcast's sake, I narrowed it down into 10 specific things I want to talk about, and 6 of them are for everywhere, and the other 4 are more event specific. So I don't know, you said you got a whole bunch of stuff that you'd like to talk about, but already in this episode you've covered fundamentals, the team structure that they're in, and coachability as 3 traits that a player really should have. How do you agree with those 3 that I just named that you listed? And are there any other big ones that you want to start off talking about?
Yeah. I agree with those for sure. And I actually, and this is kind of inverse to my approach to evaluating players, but, and maybe even what the expectation might be for the episode, but I actually want to dive into measurable statistic evaluation of players. Ooh. And kind of tackle that, because there's I think a lot of debate on the validity of using stats to evaluate players, and I think that there's massive amounts of value to players beyond statistics, but I do think that statistics serve an important role, and so I would like to kind of address that and get that pinned down so that we can expand on the world outside of stats.
I love that because I didn't even think about stats in my analysis after having some pretty heavy debates with some people about it. Many people believe that there's more to a human than stats. There's this thing called the human effect, and you got to consider that. So my whole thing is strictly human effect, non-measurables. Let's start with measurables. I'd love if you would take me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I will preface by saying that there isn't, stats aren't everything to a player. And I'm going to start off by using Rusty as an example because he is well regarded as the GOAT of Space Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to go to 2019 Nats in Detroit,
mm-hmm.
and you were to look at the top players and sort overall by average MVP, include rounds and finals, Rusty is not the top player.
What?
He's not even the top 5.
I'm confused. I don't think that's possible.
And I'm looking at it right now just to make sure that I'm not. Sometimes my mind,
I can't believe it.
Confuses
That's
things
crazy. I had no idea.
Right. And not only that, Rusty's not even the top MVP outside of the Detroit A team. Brew is above him, having been on the same team that year. But just to kind of preface that and be like, I understand that stats and MVP aren't everything. I think Rusty is an insanely good player. He's phenomenal. But there are flaws to just using statistics to evaluate a player. But I'm going to go into the value of stats real quick.
Okay.
I think that there are some benchmark rankings and statistics that are very crucial. For one thing, accuracy. I don't think that having the highest accuracy is the most valuable thing. I don't even think that having an excellent accuracy is going to be a necessarily important thing. If you look, Rusty, to bring him back, very consistently has like 75% or less accuracy in events. And it works just fine for him. It works out. But at the same time, you can't be a player going in having 20% accuracy. That is like not going to be an acceptable level of accuracy for what your team is expecting you to perform generally. Barring, new players and new entries who are getting the hang of things. But along that same line, I think there's general benchmarks for everything across the board. Like hit diff. You can't be going in and your team wins a game and you're playing scout and you have a 0.5 hit diff. That's something that's kind of, okay, even if you're playing a sacrificial role for your team, you should be tagging more people than that or getting shot less. And MVP, I don't think is like the most solid measure, but if your team is winning every game, or your team won a game and you're getting less than like 13 MVP, that's going to be kind of a problem. And so you can kind of look at, especially in winning cases, I think stats can give you better benchmarks of where players are maybe underperforming. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to hold them to any specific measure, like, oh, this scout had a worse hit diff than the other scout on the team that won, or the scout had less MVP than the other scout on the team that won, because people have different roles that they fill in the team, and it puts them in different situations that give them better advantages or disadvantages. But nonetheless, there's important roles to fill. But at the same time, there's these general benchmarks where you can see if there's like an egregious gap. Like, okay, something was lacking here. This player wasn't performing quite to expectations and was maybe lifted up by their team. I think that is like one very valid way to use stats to evaluate players, especially on a game by game basis. And then I think too, stats are good for evaluating players within levels or degrees. Like there's a difference between a competitive player who is like valuable on a team and a top tier player. And so in a top tier player, you're not looking for a scout that has a 0.8, 0.9 hit diff across an event. You're looking for a scout that, depending on the event and environment, is pushing those like 1.1, 1.2 hit diffs, or on a members night, potentially even pushing higher, even into like the upper 1 points, like 1.7, 8, 9 even. You're looking for players with like excellent performance if you're trying to build a top tier team, versus players can be perfectly capable of handling their own and playing, especially in something like a random draw, where the team dynamics aren't as hyper competitive, best of the best of the best. and still performing well, even if they're looking at 1.0, 1.1 hit diffs on a members night. Even some instances lower hit diffs, but if you look at what they're doing, maybe they're getting a lot of medic hits, but eating a lot of shots in return. That's something where it can hinder the hit diff. And an instance where you have to cross-reference the stats, which is another thing that I think is important, is not taking stats individually at face value, but looking at the picture as a whole and kind of trying to create an idea of how this player is playing and how the game is playing out. For example, you might see that a scout has like a low score. Then if you look at the hit diff, you could see that they traded almost exclusively with the enemy heavy, and you could see that the enemy medic died out very quickly. So them trading with the heavy could have helped get the commander into the resupply more frequently. And so I think stats is great, but you need to use it in order to get a picture rather than just looking at the raw numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was thinking of the voice of public opinion who might say something to the effect of, but Odin, you can't judge a player on their hit diff because what if they were playing really well and the hit diff is really low at the same time? Stats don't matter. In fact, I think that's pretty much you that said that at one point. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're like, there will be games like that. However, over a large enough sample size, the stats should more accurately reflect a player's actual skill.
Yeah, well, and, like I said, you need to really understand the picture to it. Maybe their hit diff is low, but they're helping the commander get in on the heavy. You need to not just look at the number, but the nice thing about the hit diff specifically is that we can see the story behind it. You can see who they were fighting with. The worst case scenario for you is a scout that is giving up 20, 30 shots to the enemy commander and not really giving any return fire. I think specifically, and I said this in the scout episode, but getting shot by the enemy commander is one of the worst cases of getting shot as a scout. It's feeding
You
special points is bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's all about getting as much of a picture as you can. And there's a lot of instances, like with ranking for the random draw, where you have to draw on stats. And so I think the important part is how to use it. But at the same time, it's not going to give you everything. But I also think that there are some players whose primary values are evaluable, measurable through statistics,
evaluatable.
Like we're going to talk about a lot of qualities that make a player valuable and a lot of values that a player can have. And it's not an expectation, I don't think, for somebody to check every single box at the highest degree every time. And I think some players have a lot more measurable value than the immeasurable value. You have players like Scythe and Slaughtermelon who will put up really big numbers. They'll have good hit diffs. They'll have good MVPs. They'll have good scores and stats. And that is the weight that they bring to a team. They're menacing players on the field. They're capable of getting large amounts of points. They're capable of being a bowling ball that you just roll through the enemy team. And that is a value in and of itself. And there is a lot of merit to that. But I think that it's important to find a balance in a team and make sure that you're covering your bases. You don't want every player on the team to be the type of player who's just going to run and kind of play their own game and score a lot of points and have a good personal performance, but it might not mesh with the rest of the players and tie in well, because a lot of those players especially kind of thrive on having support. I think Slaughtermelon's a good example where he plays very well at members nights and does a good job of solo carrying, but especially in competitive environments, his performance really excels when he has a team backing him and supporting his plays and supporting his plans. So, there is a lot of, like, you can still look at statistics and say, wow, this player is playing phenomenally. This player has exceptionally high stats, in the same way that you could see that a player has exceptionally low stats. The same way that you could see a player and be like, oh, their hit diff is 0.5, their MVP is 8, and be like, this might not be a player that we expect to perform very well. In the same vein, you could see a player with very high hit diffs, with very high scores, with very high MVPs, and say, this is a player who is excelling, who is accomplishing a lot. And then, it's kind of still, once you evaluate players, if you're building a team, it's still a matter of figuring out how you want people to fit on your team. But I also think building a team is maybe a separate discussion from just evaluating players and their skill levels.
Right. So that's the context where you choose players is often in building teams. But another context is when people just straight up like do their top 5 rankings, like you were mentioning. And that's really hard because it's like different roles tend to get different amounts of credit. And I think the way you said it is pretty brilliant and straightforward. Just some traits show up in stats and others do not. Is that kind of the gist of what you're saying about stats here?
Exactly. That's pretty much it. I think there's like general benchmarks, and then beyond that, you can kind of see some strengths there. But there's a lot of strengths that aren't shown in the numbers.
Can I ask you about a few different specific stats?
Yeah.
So, in this situation, like let's make it once again clear for the audience. Not everything shows up in stats, so you can't just use stats to determine a player's value, but some stats can, and I want to know specifically what traits show up in stats. So if I were to pull up a site that you've never heard of before, and we got all these new players, all you know is their code names and the stats associated with the code names, and you had to make up a team based solely on the stats that you see. This is the kind of situation that I want to talk about.
Yeah. So you want me to just dive right into like kind of what my approach would be and how I'd look at the stats?
Well, yeah, I'm looking at How would you look at the stats? Go for it.
Okay. So just to clarify the hypothetical in my head so I can nail it down. Am I like pulling players across multiple sites and I may be like looking at like members night statistics?
Sure. But you've never met these people. You have no idea about their non-measurables. So
okay.
But you can look at them. Let's say there's a 7th continent discovered. They play in tournaments across a bunch of different sites.
Okay. All right. So they have tournament stats. They have members night stats.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. All right. So one thing I would be looking for is I would be looking to see players that maybe play together frequently and have good stats together. I think that having synergies in a team is very valuable, and especially in something like commander scout duo, or like something in like a strong offensive, I may be looking for players that perform well together. So, maybe see if I can pick out, okay, I see these two players have like won a couple tournaments together. They're pretty strong. I'm looking for like a commander player probably to start, and I'm looking for score. I'm looking to see I'm going to look at their MVP, and I'm going to pick a few standout games. I'm going to pick a few wins. I'm going to pick a few losses. I'm going to look at the MVP breakdown and see really what they're doing. Are they are they getting their missiles off? Are they getting a lot of medic hits? Like how do they like to play? Try and develop a mental image of how I feel this person's approach to the game is. And so, I want to see hopefully commander and a scout, if I can, that has good teamwork together. I see the scout is putting a lot of hits into the enemy heavy. I see that the commander is breaking it, getting some medic hits, scoring high and dropping some nukes as best as possible. I'm looking for reasonable hit diffs. I'm not expecting the commander to have, a 1.5 hit diff in every game, but a commander around that 1.0 mark is good, even if they're down 0.9. 0.9 is still great if they're accomplishing the things that they need to. You know, they're getting pinged by some scouts. That's okay. Um, even occasionally down to point 0.8 is fine depending on the context. But I'm looking for a commander that is scoring points, dropping nukes, able to synergize with that scout in order to break in. And if I could grab a duo like that, that's great. Otherwise, I'm gonna fish for a scout that puts a lot of hits into heavies very safely, hopefully has like a really solid hit diff, and maybe try and pair them together and have them work on synergizing. And then I'm going to look for a scout that has really solid hit diffs and high MVP, specifically looking for MVP from shooting 3 hits. I want a scout that is able to play good control, is able to contribute that shutdown potential, to be able to like lurk around, play safe, not give up a ton of points, not have to be in the resupply constantly because they're bleeding lives, and is able to help shut down those 3 hits and help control the field. And that's really what I'm going to be looking for in my scout too. Heavy, I am going to look at accuracy on heavy especially. I think accuracy is really important on heavy. You don't want a heavy that's missing their shots every time somebody comes in, and you don't want a heavy that's spamming shots. Those shots on a heavy are very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking for a heavy that has an accuracy above 80. Above 80 is great. I'm perfectly happy with that. Higher is better. If they got an 85 accuracy and they're performing well, that's great. If they have a 90% accuracy and they're performing well, that's great. There's still going to be some variance, even in the top tier players, because there's, issues with hits not registering sometimes, or a teammate crossed in front of them, or they get IR bleed and they hit a teammate and the teammate goes down, and things that affect the accuracy. And then sometimes you have to take a couple risky shots. You tag somebody and you tag the enemy heavy, you don't have a reset, you have to try and get that shot off when they come on, and so you might bleed some shots there. So looking for a high accuracy, at least above 80%, is great to me. Hit diff, I'm not valuing as heavily on heavy. Obviously, higher stats is always better. It's always great to have high stats, but heavies have a tendency to get beaten up a lot by scouts, especially in uncoordinated play, especially on weaker teams where the team can't support them as much and control the field, and the scouts are able to get several angles on them. Heavies will get beaten up a lot. But looking at, their average MVP too, looking at where they're getting it from, are they getting a lot of missiles off? Especially if they're getting missiles off as a heavy, that shows that they're opportunistic. They're looking for opportunities in order to make these plays. They're not kind of, just putting people down and being content with that. And then for a resupply duo, I think resupply is probably the hardest role to judge based on stats. But, hopefully looking at their hit diffs, hopefully seeing reasonable hit diffs. I would love to see at least a 1.0 from the resupply duo to see that they're putting shots into people as they're coming in. Even if you're shielding the medic to help them get around a corner, you're not just running them blindly into people where they're getting blasted, so they're bleeding lives without being able to fight. Again, trying to look for duo synergy, see if there's a resupply duo that's experienced together. But barring that, at least looking for resupplies that I'll look at a few games and see their resupplies that they've given out and kind of make sure that they're, doing their job at least. Because if you're in a full length game and you're ammo and you've given out 22 rounds of shots, that's not going to really cut it. But generally looking at the hit diff, looking at the accuracy for the medic, a lot less valuable for the ammo, but you don't want your medic just spamming shots randomly places, running out of shots and not being able to resupply people. And just kind of doing the best that I can with the resupply. But like I said, I think resupply is the hardest role to measure through stats.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that would be how I would build my team.
Ooh, I really like that. One stat that you didn't mention at all that I'm kind of surprised by is medic hits.
I did bring up medikits in Commander very briefly.
Ooh. So you don't care about that in Scout?
I care about it less in Scout.
Or
I mentioned it before where don't care too much about it in Heavy, honestly. I think really a Heavy's primary job, and this is my perspective on Heavy, this may be a little detached from Value, but in my opinion, the main thing that I expect from a Heavy in terms of getting into the enemy team's resupply is pressuring them off a nuke and flushing them out of their resupply spot. And I don't expect them to get a ton of medikits. And I did mention briefly before when talking about scouts that there are instances where scouts have lower hit diff but get a lot of medikits, and it shows that they're capable of really like crashing in and getting medikits. Maybe like tuning into where the enemy medic is and like going hard for that. But I also think that if I'm trying to create the highest level competitive team, that's a play style that is a lot more rewarding in uncoordinated play, or play with like a random draw or something like a members night where the team might not be as coordinated. But against something like if they were to go play against Brisbane A, I wouldn't want to build around a player like that because Brisbane A will be a lot more effective at ensuring that a random scout can't crash in and get medikits.
Well, I find that interesting, and this is definitely just personal opinion. I personally really like heavies that go out and get medikits, and I like scouts that get them too. I think I'd rather, if I had to choose, I'd rather a team with both 3 hits go in for medikits rather than scouts, because I'd rather have the scouts more controlling. But again, it's dependent on the context, right? Like, I think what you're saying is pretty accurate for some arenas, and what I'm saying is probably better for some arenas. But ironically, in the tournament that you were just looking at, highest medic hits went to Micro, who played Heavy all tournament, and he got 153 medic hits compared to Rusty with the next highest at 118.
Yeah, that's Detroit's
fun. But that's personal, and even in my own Heavy play, I love using the Heavy on offense.
Well, I love when my team gets medic hits. If I'm building a team blindly, is kind of my whole thing is I think that just getting medic hits, especially in like members nights and random events where like I don't have the context for, isn't going to be giving me valuable information versus the other things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for a team that has like solid fundamentals, and then you can work out ways that the Heavy can get medic hits and ways that the scouts can get medic hits. But looking for those key metrics that will allow them to fill their roles on the team, I think is like the main thing that I'm looking at in terms of building a competitive top tier team looking to travel and win a Nats in some random arena that I've never seen before.
I hear you. Medikits to me,
again, personal preference.
Right. Well, medikits to me also, I think they give me 2 extra pieces of information about the player. One, they tell me how often does that player make it all the way to the other side of the map. Because in general, like, you can have a really great game and never leave the midfield. Your Scout 2 likely has very low medikits compared to the Scout 1, who seems to be helping the commander break into the enemy resupply, for example.
Yeah.
So a Heavy, like, you could have 2 very successful Heavies, one with medikits, one without, but it tells me about how they play. One is totally controlling and allowing their offense to do the heavy lifting on offense, and the other one is rotating with their commander a lot. Now, like you said, members night stats versus a tournament stat, I think, is very different, because in one of them it was very intentional part of the team design. In the other one, the Heavy's just bloodthirsty.
Yeah. Well, and I've definitely seen a lot of stats where a Heavy gets 11 medic hits and their team dies out first. Because they are, and again, context is really important, and that's where possible, taking at least a few sample games and looking at like the story behind the stats is great. I think, like, all right, this person is getting a lot of MVP. Where's that coming from? Looking at a couple games, what are they doing? What's the story here? What's their team looking like? Oh, the heavy medic died out well before the enemy team's medic. Maybe it would have been worth hanging back a little. But again, that's why we're having this discussion, is that there's a lot more to a player than just the numbers.
Absolutely. And I mentioned there's a second thing with medic hits. I think it also talks about their intentionality, because like the medic's the most carefully guarded part of the entire arena. So players who have the medic hits are aiming for that spot, and
Right.
they clearly have either the opportunistic tendencies or the microgame ability, like the athleticism or the juking, whatever it takes to break in and actually get the hit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, I think it spells out a lot of extra implications.
Yeah, absolutely. Medic hits used to be my favorite stat. That was the one I went for all day long. I was like, I don't care what goes on, I'm getting medic hits. I'm tagging that medic.
They are the favorite for many people, for sure. So I want to ask you.
It's fun.
I want to ask you about a couple extra. What do you think about MVP per minute?
MVP per minute is really interesting. Obviously, it spikes when there's elims because the game is shorter because it was an elim, and you get a bonus for eliminating. And I kind of wish that we could separate out MVP per minute into an MVP per minute disregarding eliminations, if that makes sense. Like, take out the elim bonus to see like just kind of raw, just basic, like, because really what the MVP is it's a measure of generalized contributions to the team. You're zapping the enemy medic, you're missiling people, you're as a scout shooting enemy 3 hits, you're giving your team power boosts as an ammo and medic, which is kind of a hazy if that's necessarily what you're looking for from your resupply. But generally, MVP points are given for contributions to your team. And I'm not really going to look incredibly hard at MVP per minute unless it's something where like it's an event where there weren't a lot of elims or something where I know that maybe I could actually see like how they were performing over time, or an event where like there were elims but it was later in the game, because eliminating enemy teams faster is also a skill in and of itself, and actually pressuring to get those elims and hustling for it rather than dragging out and getting it at the last minute. But in something like, I think Loveland Nats especially, I think there was some very wild variance in match times or game times, which makes for some weird MVP per minute analysis, in my opinion. And like I said, I really like to get the story behind the stat as much as possible. And I think MVP per minute is like made to simplify it even further to make it like that is the at a glance stat. Like, oh, this is what they're contributing each minute to their team.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about, I just think it's interesting to bring up nuke cancels. Obviously, nuke cancels they seem very, very contextual. You very much want the story behind it.
Yeah.
Some nuke cancels you stumble upon because the commander made a mistake. Let's look at the finals in Nats from this last year. My nuke cancel on Caleb in finals, I literally just turned my head and he was out in the open and I got him. So that was all him. The nuke cancel he got on me, I was tucked away behind my entire team guarding me and he broke in and got me. Again, all him. So, but that second one, like that, again, going to find a nuke cancel is a special kind of thing that high tier players can do. How do you look at nuke cancels?
Yeah. So actually, what I would look at with nuke cancels is like volume, because I think volume really shows kind of intentionality behind it. If you get a nuke cancel, you might have been a scout that happened upon an enemy commander on one shield. But if you're getting 4 nuke cancels, there's something going on there. You're going for those, and I think it shows a few things. One, I think it shows a good amount of game sense and kind of general awareness, right? Like you're ready to leap in, you're paying attention for the things that you should be looking out for. And it also shows a level of communication, I think, because a lot of times that nuke cancels happen, it comes when somebody calls out where the enemy commander is, and then a player registers that, hears the nuke sound, and says, okay, I know where that player is because I was listening to my team and I have that locked in. Or, hearing your team calling out that the enemy commander has a nuke and they're going somewhere, and actually paying attention to that and like locking it down. And, that can be chalked up to like, oh, good communication from the team. There's actually a large tendency with players to kind of get lazy with information, and kind of like take in this information like, oh, their team calls something out, but they're focused on what they're doing. They aren't really soaking in that information. And so I think it's actually a good testament to a player's ability to have good communication with their team and also a good amount of game sense.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. You got to look for intentionality. Are they doing it somewhat repeatedly? I don't even know what that rate would be if you look across a person's whole career, but like if you got 10 nuke cancels in a career, that's pretty cool.
I think that's another like arena dependent thing too.
Yeah, probably.
Some arenas it's either harder to find a good nuke spot, or it's like harder to defend a good nuke. Like it's harder, or it's either hard to find a good spot, or it's like there's 2 or 3 staple spots that everybody goes to, and they know that you're going to be in one of those spots, and so the different arenas have different things that might make it easier or harder to get a nuke off safely.
Yeah. One more I'm going to throw out. Got missiled. What do you like?
Got missiled is it. So this is one that's very like event contextual. I am not going to blame anybody for not throwing their back out to not get missiled at a members night.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, some people may remember in 2017 Nats I played in a boot, because I obliterated my ankle. That injury happened because I tried to dodge a missile at a members night practicing for Nats. Yeah, no, I regret that.
Oh my God.
I regret destroying myself for Nats to dodge a missile at members night. So a bit of context, but at the same time, you want somebody who's able to hustle. You want somebody who's like going to put that effort in, that reliable effort all the way through the tournament, all the way through finals. And when you see somebody at a tournament with a high got missiled stat, you know that they're eating missiles, which usually means they're not moving very well. And oftentimes it means that they are in bad positions, because they're in circumstances where the enemy player can get a missile on them without getting interrupted, without having to worry about getting shot down. And a lot of times it shows a bad level of stubbornness. A lot of people will push too far forward and not fall back when they should. And lingering gets you missiled a lot. I know, because it's happened to me. I'm not leading got missiled stats, but I've pushed in and then been like, I feel like I can hang around here. And then a 3 comes around the corner and missiles me. And I'm like, okay, well, that's on me.
Yeah.
So, again, looking at extremes, right? I think a lot of stats when looking at like when evaluating players, the best cases where you can get the most reliable info on a player is through the extremes. Okay, this player has gotten missiled a ton. They're getting missiled all the time. Or okay, this player got missiled once the entire event. Like they're obviously hustling, putting themselves in good positions, playing around their team. Um, so you know,
All right. Hey, I appreciate you giving all that insight on stats, because the truth is, it is information, and information is valuable. It's kind of one of the things you said at the top, that when you are evaluating players, you need information on them. You need to be able to watch them. And if you can't watch them, if you don't know them personally, if you don't know their play style personally, then you have stats. And what are we going to do? Not use stats? Like just go off of nothing?
I use stats every day, dude. Not actually, but I have been known to stalk the Loveland Members Night stats from time to time.
That is so exciting. That
Take a little
we have a
peek-see.
stalker. I love it.
Occasionally I'll send a random message to Joe right after Members Night when the stats go up, and I'm like, so that Bromley Commander game, huh?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Bromley wrecked me on Commander just this last week. In my final player trait, I'm going to bring up Bromley in that game. All right.
Good. I want to hear it. I want I have the stats. I don't have the story.
Yeah,
story.
Absolutely. I'll give you the story. We'll make sure we get it. But it goes right in line with my final factor.
Perfect.
Now, just for the quote that people can take out of context, just that hot take. Odin's Fist, if you were to take any one stat and use it solely to rank players, which stat would it be?
Oh geez. Okay, this might be a cheap out. I'm gonna ask a question, which whatever. But if I say hit diff, can I click on the hit diff stat?
Yeah,
and look at the breakdown.
No, you can't click on the hit diff. This is like where you know how you can click the word at the top and it organizes everybody by that number.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we are doing the next random draw based on the order of.
I'm gonna get wrecked for this, but the reason we have it, the best stat to just break down as an individual and use it to rank players by. Not saying it's good to do this. I'm saying that this will, in general, get you the better spread between all the stats. Is average MVP.
Oh!
Controversial, I know.
Aiden loves MVP. Aiden thinks MVP is the best stat to rank players with.
MVP, actually,
you're such a nerd.
I would rank every player by shoe size. That's the stat I would use.
Yeah. I didn't know you were going to give that tip live on air. I told you in private I rank players by height.
The problem is just that MVP gives you the most context in a single number. There's a lot that goes in MVP. If you look at hit diff, a player could have a 5.0 hit diff, and you find out that they hit in a corner and shot 5 people the whole game and got shot once.
Well, here's the reality. Everybody in a perfect world would have their own MVP. It's just that the algorithm that makes up that MVP would probably be a little different for all of us, and it would include the non-measurables. Somehow you would be able to measure them. But in reality, we all make our own tier lists in our head, and we use different things. We emphasize different things more or less than other people. And MVP is exactly that. But it takes only measurables, and it takes measurables weighed by a certain committee of players to get what they believe to be the best prediction of a player's skill.
Yeah. And those immeasurables are a very important part of the game and players. And also, I think it is one of the things that makes it so difficult to evaluate players, especially like a lot of laser tag players are really big fans of sports. And, I'm not going to say that there's not immeasurables in sports, but a lot of sports that people watch are very measurable.
Oh, definitely.
Like, you watch basketball, there's, like you can measure assists and passes, and there's a lot that goes on that you can just have a number for that because it is, a ball moving between players and they do a thing. And there's like specific things that they're supposed to do. And you can count the number of times that they do it. Versus in laser tag, it's like nobody is in the arena counting the number of times that the ammo eats a missile for the medic, that is not helping their
history
MVP.
will never remember them that way, unfortunately.
No. The game has so much going on and a lot of walls. You'd be surprised how hard it is to tell what players are doing when there's like 17 walls in between you and them.
Absolutely. No, you're right. And I think part of this may be the human effect, the fact that we know all these players personally. I'm like, wait, but you're forgetting that they have these immeasurable qualities. It doesn't come out in the numbers. It's not fair to use the numbers. Well, there's a lot of really great qualities about all the different quarterbacks in the NFL, but at the end of the season, darn well, I'm talking about how many passing yards did they get? How many touchdowns did they throw? How many games did they win? The measurables are what people look back. We talk about Michael Jordan, in this season, he got this many 2-pointers, this many 3-pointers. We're not going to say, man, in this year, Michael Jordan was a really good basketball player. Okay, how good? He was like the best basketball player. There were so many immeasurables that just made him the best. No. He won 6 championships. That's what people say,
Yep.
So unfortunately, like, numbers just resonate with some people, and I think they resonate more when you don't actually know the person.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I'd like to move on from stats and spend the rest of the time talking about some of these immeasurables. And if I may be so bold as to take the lead for a little bit here, I want to tell you these 10 traits that I personally have kind of ranked as most important. But I would, if you got some, Aiden, I'd love for you to like keep them in your pocket. Let me know if I either hit on one, or if at the end I didn't say it at all. And I want to hear what you think are the most important non-measurables at that point. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So again, we're building these players to play in every kind of event possible, including a members night. So we can't just so we're ignoring the whole contextual factor, but I am going to put a couple in. So my first 6 are all things that matter in every type of laser tag event. And there are 2 categories. The 2 categories are essentially macro game and micro game. Macro game is a player's understanding of the overall game as though they were playing a game of chess. Like they have a top-down perspective, how all 12 players are interacting and how to win games from a larger picture perspective. Micro game is all about the effective execution of said macro game strategies. Micro game is the movements, the jukes, the positionings, the pulling your trigger a quarter of a second before your opponent and getting the tag before they do. It is so much more in just the smallest details of the game. Did I use those terms correctly, Aiden?
Yeah. Microplay, the way that I say it usually is macro play is the way that you play the game out, and microplay is the way that you as an individual play and move.
Right.
In the moment.
So I think both are important just from a general perspective. Macro game is the strategy that you're choosing to employ, and micro is your ability to execute said strategy. I know players who have one but not the other, and they are strong in certain ways, but they can never become they never hit the fullest potential. You need both. So in macro game, the 3 things I look for in a player, and I stole from a Kodama here. He made an excellent video about how to play SM5. We've got it on our YouTube channel right at the top of the SM5 201 playlist. And he said the number one thing is game sense and awareness. This is your ability to understand what is going on in the game and what you should do about it. If I showed you a brand new sport for the very first time, you would have zero game sense. You wouldn't have ever seen a full game play out. You wouldn't know the nuances. If we were to, show you one game of SM5, you got no game sense. But players develop game sense through a number of ways. They build it by actually getting to see lots of Space Marines 5. They get it through asking about the nuances. In fact, the way I want to explain this is the way Thunder explained it to me. He said, like, people start out with a one-dimensional understanding of the game. Those are like the core basics. Score lots of points. Score more points than the enemy team, right? Then you get a two-dimensional understanding of the game. Like, you can get more points than the enemy team by tagging them more than they tag you, or by killing out their team and not getting yours killed out. Okay, now we have a little more nuance. Then you got three-dimensional understanding of the game. All the different ways that these win conditions can be met. And then you got like four-dimensional understanding. Like, I'm going to move away from these basic goals to get roundabout winning the smaller goals and eventually win the overall goals. Like, it's hard to explain, and I don't know if I'm doing a very good job, but players need a good understanding of the game and a good ability to see it when they're actually in the arena.
Yeah, I agree. I think game sense is a very important part, and I think the rough thing about game sense is that it boils down to experience. But experience isn't just number of games played, right?
No.
I like to consider it like, for example, I used to, like, at work, I would sit with a paper and a pen, and I would draw out rudimentary maps of the Sacramento arena and, like, visualize players being in different positions and thinking about like what I could do in those circumstances. And to me, that is a game experienced. It's not a game that I played, but sitting there and putting the work in to work it out and come up with this gave me more experience. And you can also draw upon others' experience. I think one of the most valuable things, especially in regards to the state of the game now, comes from sharing experience and sharing information. I can teach a player, hey, these are some tricks that I do. These are some things that you can do in these circumstances. And they can take that and practice it a few times and get it down, versus having to dedicate an entire stretch of learning and experiencing and understanding of the game in order to uncover that themselves. And that's something that's helped me. There have been several times in the past where I reached out to players and I said, hey, I want your opinion on this. Or what do you think of this? Or what is your advice for me in this situation? And I've drawn from their experience, and I use that to kind of pave shortcuts for myself to where I'm like, cool, I can build off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're building a team, you need players who understand the game very well. And we learn from each other when we have these big discussions and go to each other for input. Definitely want a player who has that.
And to touch on the awareness aspect of it, I think that awareness is also very important. And I think that's a very specific subcategory of game sense, where you have enough experience to be aware of what's going on in the game. You can hear sound effects that people are getting resupplied in the overhead speaker, but who's getting resupplied? The speakers don't tell you that. They don't say enemy heavy has been resupplied. But if you have enough experience in the game and you have enough awareness of what's going on around you, you can say, okay, well, I'm the heavy, I'm with my resupply. My resupply isn't resupplying anybody. And I just watched their commander leave. So the heavy probably got resupplied. In general, have a general understanding of what's going on in the game and being able to make these judgment calls where you're like, I'm sure enough that this is what's happening, that I can play around that. There was there was a funny moment in the tournament that just happened. I had a barely nuke over nuke cancel against Snuffles in a head-to-head commander game. Snuffles is a great player. I love him. And it was a fun game. And I remember I got my second nuke. I was in the midfield. I paused for a second and I sprinted back to my team. And I'm running in, and I was like, you want me to fill you up? I said, no, I have to drop before Snuffles drops. Mm-hmm. Snuffles is going to drop. I have to drop before he drops. And I start dropping my nuke, and I hear it go off, and then I hear Snuffles' nuke start going off.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's an awareness and game sense thing, like understanding the pacing of the game, really getting a feel for like when not just you should be looking for moves, but when your opponents are going to be looking for. Oh, they haven't been pushing out and we haven't been pressuring them. They're getting full and there's a big wave coming our way. Understanding kind of like where the enemy team is at and what their state is also very important.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it. I put them in the same category for a reason. If a person has game sense and they don't have awareness, it is a person that will come out of games and talk about the theory, and then they're completely ineffective at using any of it when they're actually playing Space Marines. Mm-hmm. They would only be effective if you could like have them doing a phone call with you during the game, and you have them in your ear and they can like help you make decisions from a
coaching
little,
on the headset,
like an offensive coordinator. But we don't have that, and I don't think we ever will. We shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, the second one under macro game, I'm going to call it creativity, but what I mean by creativity is really risk analysis / risk taking. I think in order for players to break through a certain caliber of play, they need to be willing to, one, recognize good risks, like things that have a high reward and low probability of failure, like a low risk, high reward kind of gambles. To know that like in a losing situation, they're willing to take high risk, high reward gambles, or when they're very much winning games, knowing to take low risk, low reward gambles and not throw the win away. So risk analysis is choosing what kind of risks you want to take at what times, and then having the ability to actually take those risks. A player that I really respect for this kind of quality, and I was thinking I might be nice to actually name people as I go through these. So I would definitely say that you, Odin, are someone who has great game sense and awareness for that reason. I'm going to credit this creativity, risk analysis, risk taking with Slaughtermelon. I particularly have always seen him as a gambler. In the last two Nats I've seen, it's not that he just bashes his head into the wall. He knows that he knows that when he's behind, he has to take bigger risks in order to get back ahead of the enemy, and that when he is winning, he doesn't need to keep taking those giant risks. But he doesn't play from behind usually. He will do pretty desperate and I'll say ballsy things to get back in the game when the game requires it. And I really admire players who are willing to do that, because when my team is losing or I'm strapped down with another player and I can't take those risks, I need other playmakers on my team. In many ways, what I'm really talking about is playmaking.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very big point for me, but I consider it, like partially playmaking, but like flip potential, the ability to take a game where they're behind and take control of it through a pivotal moment and really run away with it. And I think in a way it ties into and also depends on adaptability, which is a separate point and separate trait, but I think they're very closely related. But I think it's very important to have a player that can turn losses into wins.
Yeah.
And that's actually a trait that you can see in a lot of players. When you see them taking losing games and you see them, flipping it against all odds. An instance that comes to mind kind of is Strikva in this most recent tournament had a game where he was playing Commander, and the game was just lost. It was his team was getting eliminated. It was pretty much over, and he found a way to pull himself back into the game and rack up an exceptional number of special points.
This game
dropped 2
was
nukes,
amazing. Yeah.
and his team survived. They didn't win the game, but his team should have, by all means, been eliminated. And his team survived, and they actually got pretty close to eliminating the other team. Just in terms, not that it would have happened, but in terms of like it was really close. I think there was one player left, less than 10 lives, on the enemy team, and that's something where it's like James didn't just succumb to the slow bleed. He found angles and ways, or Strikva, sorry, using real names, but code names are easier. Strikva, found ways, found angles, found approaches where he was able to put everything on the line and make something happen. The typical play that you would expect to see in that situation is everyone hiding in corners, playing very slowly, trying to preserve their lives as long as possible and hide. And I'm not saying that he wasn't tucking away and playing safe, but he was very clearly tagging the crap out of people, because you don't get that many special points sitting in a corner and being rushed and bleeding out. He was moving around and making plays, and that was something very impressive. And I agree with Slaughtermelon as a great example of a player who's able to flip games and take big risks. And I think kind of an important trait with it, in terms of like the risk analysis, is consistency. I think there's a lot of players who will do only risky plays, heavies that always attack. It's a risky strategy. Sometimes you can kill the enemy medic out before yours dies, and it works, and you win the game. But that doesn't mean that you should do it every game, And so, kind of like seeing players with consistency, where you see them winning games that you imagine they probably shouldn't have been. It's like, okay, well, this is somebody who knows how to take those risks. Somebody knows how to upset the game and upset, the match against the other team. And I think that that's very important. This is an instance where I'm not going to name names, but I can think of very specific examples in the past with teams that made it to finals in a tournament, or like performed really well and then didn't make it, didn't take first. And it was very evident that they never were going to. They didn't have the players on the team who could do what it took to flip a game and upset a game or a match against, frankly, just stronger team. And so I think it's very important. I think also it's important to like limit this factor on your team. I think there's a few player aspects that are like that, where you don't want to overload your team with it. If your team is all risk takers who are trying to take the game into their own hands, and they're all trying to do their own thing to flip it, then a lot of times that leads to like collisions of ideas that actually hinder everyone's plans, versus sometimes you have to be able to be like, somebody has a plan, they lay it out, and everyone has to commit to it. And that was something that we talked about for our team for the New Zealand Nats in 2023 was, even if you think it's a losing strategy, like you personally, as a team, we have to be able to come together and support the idea, because everyone working,
or else it will not work, guaranteed.
Yeah, exactly. It's better to have everyone working behind one idea that maybe not be the best, but then to have everyone doing their own thing. Because even bad strategies work sometimes. It happens. If you're more committed to it and the enemy team falls apart, then things can happen. Things can fall into place. But if your team is battling each other, you're just making things harder for yourselves.
Yeah, that is That is so true. 100%. I love that. We talked about that for NAS 24 too. Because when you have somebody going out to make a risky play and no one supports them, or people are even like telling them, what are you doing? Stop doing that. Well, now you're guaranteed going to lose the game because your team's falling apart officially. Y'all got to work together. But 100%, I would much, much, much rather have people who take too many risks on my team than players who don't take enough risks, even if it's like the whole team. It's not that I want players who are always taking risks. Not at all. Like there are intelligent times for it. Like when your medic dies, right? This is something that is almost common sense to a lot of players. Your medic dies, the enemy team's medic has not died. Let's say let's say you lost last game, right? So let's take out that variable. You're behind and you need to win this game by like 3,000 points. Your medic dies, their medic has not died. The only way to win the game is to take some high risk, high reward plays that are probably not going to work to kill out their medic and eliminate the enemy team, even though your medic's already dead. If you hole up, maybe you'll survive the game, but you've already lost the match. You can't win that way. I want players who like instinctually understand that and have the ability to go and do that.
Yeah.
Heck, sometimes I want to be saved by my teammate. Maybe I'm going to mess up. I can't be responsible for everything. Heck.
Yeah. Well, let's just to make it easier, let's say that you at the rate it's like there's plenty of time for the enemy team to eliminate your team, because 3,000 points you could do by holding up and trying to survive it and outscoring. But
yeah, I guess.
But yeah,
I hear you.
I get the premise.
You got eliminated last game. Let's say that's the case.
Right. And actually, I think a lot of times, a lot of teams and a lot of players, especially specific players, get unlocked when the resupply dies. When they're able to say, okay, well, like now we have to make things work. We're getting everybody in the field. We're not playing reserve. This is it. We're brawling. And a lot of times, like medics will die within seconds of each other in a lot of games. A lot of times it's not that far gone. Maybe your medic died, but your team was just resupplying better and your commander's close to a nuke. Like there's a lot that you can do. And yeah. I think that understanding when you need to make plays also kind of ties into that game sense, and really, I think a lot of things come back to game sense, which is why like experience and knowledge holds a lot of value. But I mean, you have to know when to do things and when not to do things. When as a commander you need to take that risky nuke. You're around the corner from the enemy team, but you have to drop it right then. Versus you could go back and sit behind your heavy and drop. Being able to actually weigh the risk is very important. I do agree.
Yeah. Cool. So I will simplify that one to just playmaking, and we got game sense awareness above. The third one, possible play styles / archetypes. So I'll just call it play style. But what I mean by this is, and I'm gonna get way too into the archetypes of players in my little video that I'm going to make after, because I have thought of like 30 to 40 archetypes. An archetype is like a common persona that you see over and over again among different players. And, when you pick a player, often they have a certain archetype. And so you pigeonhole them into certain roles. Their strengths, their weaknesses. I want a player who has multiple really solid play styles that they can use to adapt to whatever the game is. A common archetype would be what I would call the charger. A player who, no matter what role they're playing, their main focus is, I want a high score, I want medic hits, I love to attack. Sitting in the resupply or sitting on defense literally gives me like a twitch, and I hate the game when I have to do it. Do you know this archetype of a player, Aiden? I'm sure you've met a few of these guys.
At least a couple.
Yeah. So
you have to zap as many people as possible, or you're not playing the game.
Right. Like, you know that when you have them on your team, no matter what role it is, that play style is going to change the way that they fundamentally understand their position. What I want is a player that is willing to play multiple types of ways, because there are times in the game, no matter what role you're playing, when that charger aspect is the best thing for your team. Sometimes you do need a full offense, a full court press kind of play style, or as a team or as a player. But sometimes that is exactly what is the worst thing for you to do. And you need to also be able to play kind of a midfield control or a sniper play style, or to come back and be more of a tank, be more of a defender, whatever it might be. So I like players that have enough tools in their tool belt to shift around how they play. The player that I'm going to call out as being particularly good at this is the Fear Turkey from my site. Josiah, I think his default is to be that uber fast, beat people with his micro skills kind of offensive powerhouse, that medic killing predatory machine. But you only see him whip that out when the game calls for it. He can also play a vigilant defender. He can be a team leader. He can be a silent sniper. He can be a risk taker. He can be a support. He can be a carry. Whatever you need him to be in context of the team, he will become that. And I very much value that in players.
Yeah, I think for me it's the adaptability. It's the ability to fill different roles that's really important to me. Even if you have,
That's probably a better word for it.
Even if you have okay, we need a commander player, so we're looking for somebody who's got a commander. There are instances, where you're looking for people who specialize in certain things, but even in there, you have to be adaptable. You have to be able to adjust to the game. The game is so complex, and so many different things can happen. All of a sudden, the team that you're playing against walls the next game. Your approach has to be different to a team that's turtling or walling or totem pulling than your approach to a team that is playing very aggressive, leaving their resupply alone to kind of split up and survive and regroup for some resupplies here and there, or teams that are playing very mobile. The approach has to be adjusted. Like, no matter what, over the course of a tournament, you're going to have to do things differently. In some instances, members nights or some for fun tournaments, you can kind of brute force some play styles. Some play styles you can kind of really get away with, like the medic killing play style. You can kind of brute force sometimes in more casual settings. But in a tournament setting where you have to be able to beat everybody, you have to be able to put up that consistent performance and be reliable, you have to be able to adjust to what the game demands of you. And that's very true no matter who you are or what you're playing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so those are my 3 for macro game. I want to go to micro game a little bit. So that is the effective execution portion. That if a player possesses those top 3 things that we just mentioned, these next 3 have to do with being able to actually accomplish that. The first thing that I really value in a player is reps. When I was in getting my undergrad, I had a professor who told me a statistic. He was like, "Do you know what the most common element is of students who pass the final exam?" He was talking about exams in general, that when people take tests, what is the most common element people have in terms of people that pass the test? People generally thought it was like, oh, their intelligence, or some people thought like it was their culture, their age, whatever it might be. And the answer seemed kind of obvious. He said it was the amount of times they've practiced that test. So like, if I took a genius and I took a random average intelligence person, but I gave the person with average intelligence the pre-test and they got to see the answers and then retake the test 3 times, that average person is going to do better on the test than the genius, most likely. Like just getting a chance to go and experience something ahead of time and then to come back and do it again and again and again and again. No matter what your natural capabilities are, no matter your level of intellect, no matter your physical ability, no matter your play style, this, I think, could potentially be the number one factor in all of Space Marines. As far as a player's effectiveness, do they have reps? And that looks like a few different things. How many total games do they have of laser tag at all? How many times have they gotten to play in this arena that they're playing in today? How many times have they gotten to play with the players they're playing with? How many times have they gotten to play the position that they're playing? The player that I will reference is Rusty. Rusty, the bona fide goat of laser tag, who is nearing 10,000 total Laserforce games, which is completely nuts. That partially goes to show, and it's not just the reps, of course, but I think it's one of the most fundamental things. It's so much muscle memory for Rusty that you could put him in an arena that he's never even played in before, but he has been in so many different arenas. He's stretched that muscle so many times. Like, it's just like an unconscious behavior for him. And when you free up that brain space in Space Marines and you free up that muscle memory physically, you got so much more room to be creative and innovative and think clearly about what you're doing. Yeah, reps.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's seen like in all sports, really. You know, anybody can sit on their couch and be like, oh, the soccer player should pass the ball to the other soccer player. But in practice, actually being able to, you know, dribble it up, have to deal with everyone running at you and still be able to get a clean pass off to a teammate, that requires you to do it over and over and over again until you have it down. You're not going to be able to just be like, oh, yep, I should pass the ball. I should do that. And then do it. Just first time playing soccer. And it's the same thing in laser tag, especially. And I like this being in the micro play section because, you know, especially with movement and the way that you move around the field, experience has so much to do with that. You see a lot of newer players and the way that they move around the field, you know, you might call it meandering, but you know, the way they move gets themselves shot more. You know, they're not really moving wall to wall. They aren't really angling their phasers so that they can clear a wall at the same, like, and be able to actually tag somebody reasonably. You know, they're holding their phaser at a weird angle, so people are able to tag their phaser down. And so a lot of these things that you experience that like break you of these habits, the biggest thing being keeping your phaser up. Like, that's like probably the number one complaint that people have against players. If you were to like record the number of times that people complained at a teammate, especially like in the backline, it probably number one would be keep your phaser up. But you know, that's the thing where you have to practice it. Holding your hands like that, just resting at any point, is not natural. You have to teach your body that you have to do it. And that kind of maneuvering around the field and that kind of like, you know, those reflexes like, oh, I'm battling this other player. I just saw them go this way. I'm going to go this way. Those are things that you have to train. And yeah, I agree with what you said about like freeing up the brain. You know, that was kind of one of the biggest moments of development for me were when I felt like I could really fight anybody in the midfield naturally. And so then I could be thinking about what my next step actually is, what my goals are, what am I trying to accomplish here, rather than just fighting people and then trying to deal with that and think about how I'm going to fight them.
Yeah, totally spot on. I'm gonna keep moving. So my next one in micro game is positioning. This is the other most important quality that Kodama mentions in his How to Play Space Marines video, that essentially if a player has game sense and awareness and positioning, that makes up like 70% of everything you need to know. Positioning comes somewhat with arena experience, of course, but it also comes with lots of experience in different arenas. Just knowing generally that if we were to like put you in randomized maps every single game, you would be able to more quickly figure out where the best positions are because it's relative to where other players are and what your position is on the field, what position you're playing. You know, commanders and heavies and scouts, medics and ammo, all positioned differently for different optimizing effects and different purposes. There is so much about this game where like you when you're face to face with somebody, you need certain levels of skill to, you know, box and outshoot them. But most of the tags in the game just come from hitting someone in the shoulder or the back because you were better positioned than them. So it's something where you just don't want to overthink it. Having good positioning is an essential. The master at positioning, in my opinion, is Thunder. Thunder has this galaxy brain. He's not the most athletic person, but he had the highest hit diff in the tournament at Nats 23. He was always standing in a spot that you weren't expecting him because he was predicting your movement and he was making sure he wasn't getting shot, and he was incredibly effective at it. Yeah, position well.
Yeah, and Thunder is a phenomenal example of positioning. And I think, you know, to kind of try and give an example to help visualize and give a you know, example of how to understand the difference between good and bad positioning. I think in most fields, the center of the arena versus the outside of the arena is a good way to see this. Players who have bad senses of positioning will be in the center of the arena at bad times and eat a lot of shots. They'll end up having worse hit diffs. And I do think hit diff is a great stat to like look at in terms of
positioning.
That's
a good point.
But like specifically knowing when to enter the center of a field versus when to be on the outside is very important. And, you know, theoretically you could hover around the outside of the field like you're playing a battle royale and just try and pick people off in the back, but you're not always contributing the most to your team, and it's not always valuable. You know, you could sit, say, you know, at red base in Loveland all game long and take cheeky shots and then hide and pad your hit diff as much as possible. But you're not necessarily going to be as active in the game, and you're not going to be contributing as much, and there's going to be so many opportunities that you miss. And I think a lot of positioning really comes down to those, like being able to take those opportunities and like being where you, the short of it is being where your team needs you to be. But yeah, I think like you can definitely tell like players running around in the center of an arena just getting beat up because they don't know where to go is a really good example of like a misunderstanding of positioning.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe we need a positioning tutorial podcast at some point.
That'd be fun. I think we need that one to be visual so that we can like look at different maps.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Like the thing is, any single spot in an arena can be a good position based on the context. Where are other players standing? What is your intention? Are you trying to push in? Are you trying to guard a territory? Are you waiting with like a fishnet in a high traffic area to score points? Like, you're right. The rat hole, as we call it in Loveland, tends to be one. It's a classic position where people don't expect you to stand, and you can get lots of shots off. But once people catch on to you, you tend to like get less shots, and people are paying more attention to you. So it's like the value can decrease. It can be a good spot 1 minute and a bad spot the next minute. And like if you have a 2 hit diff by the end of the game, but you only tagged 15 people, you didn't help out the team as much as you could have standing in other spots. So again, it's also about potential. Like sometimes you have to give up a good position to pursue a great position.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, the position to be in is inside the enemy resupply.
That's my favorite. Unless I'm a resupply.
No, you don't want to be in the enemy resupply as a resupply?
Oh my gosh. No, not me. Maybe Caleb.
I won medic on medic hits this tournament, so
good on you. What way to go.
That's me.
What does that feel better than the first place trophy?
Oh yeah.
Let's go.
Well, it's funny because, you know, at no point was I actually attacking anybody. I okay, I don't want to get into story mode. Really
I don't care.
I'll tell you after.
Depends on yeah. All right, sounds good. Well, we'll just let everybody wonder now. In fact, I think you got to tell it. Everyone's wondering now. People are going to get off the podcast and be like, "What the heck? What was Odin's story?"
Yeah, no, I wasn't like I wasn't attacking ever. All of it was that I was like, "Huh, the whole enemy team is here. I need to not be here," and I would go somewhere else. And then the enemy resupply would be running around because their whole team abandoned them and is attacking us. And so we'd run into each other at like the medic fallback spots, and I'd be like, "Oh hey."
Oh, random draw.
Or actually, one of them was because we were getting beat up too hard, and I was like, "Okay, we're not being defended. I'm leaving." And I leave, and I'd like, "Wait, their heavy was attacking us. I'm gonna take their resupply spot." And so I ran into the enemy team's resupply, and I was like, "This is my spot now."
Hey,
but
yeah, we said in the medic episode,
So-
you're a player with a phaser. Go beat them up for disrespecting you.
so I guess technically one of the medic hits was me attacking, but it was self-defense. I had to preserve my lives before all else, you know. So, and that just happened to be going and shooting the other team.
Well done, Aiden.
It was fun.
Okay.
Medic on medic hits are so funny because it's like somebody's not where they're supposed to be here.
It's like that meme of the Spider-Man pointing at each other.
Yeah.
What are you doing here? Okay.
Yeah.
I got one more in my main 6 traits that I look for, and that is, I think this one will be a little controversial. People may disagree with me on this, but I have a point.
I disagree.
Athleticism. I think your athleticism is an extremely important part of playing this sport, because it is a sport. There are factors that there are things that you can or cannot do based on your athleticism. And I'm going to use Strikva as my example of athleticism. I don't know if any other player in the tournament could have done what Strikva did in those final minutes. For Strikva to have the macro game to know where to stand and how to stand in order to get essentially a nuke and a half with only like 2 lives. I think it was it 2 lives? I am going to pull it up.
He got the last nuke on 2 lives. He got the one before he hit that point, but he stayed on 2 lives for an incredibly long time and got like a whole nuke off of it. It's crazy.
Okay, so he dropped his first nuke at 3 lives and then got an entire second nuke, losing only 2 lives. So that kind of stuff is exactly why athleticism matters. And that was only on 1 base. So that was 15 tags against the entire enemy team. Just complete physical outplaying. Having the macro game to know what to do, and then your body having the ability to do it. So this isn't some like Strikva is extremely athletic. They know they can do things with their body that I can't do in terms of laser tag. It's just a factor I'll never have, even if I get myself in physical condition. Like some people just have that special talent, or they have that ability. So that's like athleticism's benefits at its peak. It has other benefits that are varied, but sometimes kind of minor as far as how they impact the game. Your ability to jump high, your ability to run fast, your ability to box and come around corners quickly, your shot speed. Let's see, your ability to missile effectively, your ability to missile dodge effectively, being able to play effective mind games and juke with people, to squat for long periods of time, your endurance to last an entire game or an entire tournament and still play at the same effectiveness. One of the things I love about Space Marines 5 is how really anybody can play it and be really good at it. Like I said with positioning, like if you have good positioning, you may not really need athleticism, But at the same time, there are definitely players that I put in prime positions partially because of their athleticism. Because even without tons of macro games, sometimes your micro game alone, with the right structure and the right context, can be enough. Sometimes, like with all the strategy we talk about, sometimes it just comes down to you staring at another player and which one of you is going to pull the trigger first. Which one of you is going to get the shot off? Which one of you is going to outsmart the other with your body? And effective use of athleticism can turn a losing situation into a winning one. A person with athleticism can go into a base with 3 active players and tag all 3 of them without going down themselves, purely based on that ability. And let's just talk about like average, like if you can at least keep yourself in decent shape, like you can last a whole tournament. I've definitely struggled with this in the past. I've been pretty open about it. Like I sweat like a dog when I'm playing tournaments. After day 2, I have often felt like so drained. My bones are hurting, and I begin to play worse because I am not in shape enough to keep up the whole tournament. And then my team suffers. If I lack energy in the middle of a game of Space Marines, my brain isn't functioning at full capacity. I'm not being creative. I'm not taking risks. I'm not having awareness. I'm getting tunnel vision. I'm getting frustrated more easily. Like, I'm not the same player as when I have full energy and I'm fully, able to move the way I want to. So yeah, I value athleticism, and I think I value it potentially more than some other players. I'd be curious of your take on this.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you, but I'm going to disagree with you in a very roundabout way.
Okay.
I think part of it too is that athleticism is actually probably more broad of a topic than we give it credit for. For example, Disco Monkey is not going to run around. He's not going to run circles around people. He's not going to pull out what Strickva does, but he has a tremendous amount of stamina. Disco Monkey will play an entire tournament, start to finish. It does not matter how many games it is. He could play 60 games in a day, and he'll play the same at the end of the night as he did at the start. And I think that is something that's valuable, but might not be the first thing people think of when they talk about athleticism. But I think that athleticism is kind of like more of a means to an end. I think that it really shows in people's other values, like, okay, certain playmakers are people who are better at breaking into enemy resupply solo. They're leveraging their athleticism a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be a very athletic player, and I rode on that almost exclusively for the start of my laser tech career.
Mm-hmm.
Messing my ankle up in 2017 was a huge hit and very unfortunate, because up until that point, I was only playing laser tag based on my ability to move my body.
Mm-hmm.
One of my big strategies in Sacramento was pressuring from one angle and then crouching low enough to hide behind the half walls and running all the way around the other side to be able to get around backtracks and to be able to get in before they realize that anything's amiss or try to push me out, which was just pure speed and ability to get and maintain my body being that low for that stretch of time. And that was like nothing with it was a little bit of creativity, like, okay, I'm gonna attack from here and push around there, but really it was just relying on raw speed to outmaneuver opponents.
Mm-hmm.
And it accomplished things, but I became a exponentially better player when I stopped relying on it. And so in a way, I think that some players allow their athleticism to hinder them and hinder their growth as a player. I think I observe the same things that I experienced in other people sometimes. And also there's there's something to be said for just like what you're expected to contribute to the team. Uh, like if you
Hmm.
are playing the Thunder Scout, you're expected to be positional and supporting the team and putting shots into 3 hits.
Hmm.
You don't really need to be athletic in order to accomplish that. You don't need to be running around as much. And yes, being able to run around does help, but I think it's kind of, talking about the averages, I think there's kind of a baseline expectation. There's kind of like you have to be able to reach certain benchmarks and do certain things in order to satisfy the needs of the team. But once you do that, you're kind of fine. And anything beyond that depends a lot more on what you're trying to do and what your contributions to your team are. Like using the James example, or talking about Ghost from Loveland, who also runs
Hmm.
around a lot. They're kind of accomplishing their own objectives, and they're doing things and utilizing and wielding their athleticism as a weapon, which is fine. But I wouldn't say that it puts them above other players. And I actually don't think I really have seen examples of athleticism putting them above other players, except at like the entry level. I think when players are starting and a lot of the gameplay is very micro game based, very mechanical, very how you move and tag other people, I think that athleticism gives a huge advantage there. But once players start getting into like the deeper end of game sense and positioning, I think the importance of athleticism tapers off a lot. Um,
Mm.
but I do agree that it contributes and it opens your options up. Um, I had some games at the tournament where I rushed right off the start of the game into the enemy resupply, and I just was fast enough to be able to do it, which is a thing that I'm grateful for, and that gave me that option. That's something that I
Hmm.
wouldn't have been able to do if I couldn't move that well. But I think that the thing is that the game is so expansive and there's so many opportunities that I don't think that made it better. That was just an option that I had that I could utilize. But I think I often did find plenty of other ways to play the game where I didn't have to do that. And I don't think that the outcome was any better. I think it was just kind of like a tool and a strategy that could be employed. So I'm probably rambling a bit too much here, but
No, you're all
I
good.
guess my point is that, you know, having athleticism does open up options, but I don't think it's entirely necessary. And I don't think that athleticism as a trait is enough to elevate any player above other players.
Mm. I kind of I see some of your point. Like, I don't agree with that final statement because it makes it sound like it has no value. When you did say like it gives you other options when you were able to outmove certain other people, or what I'm talking about, Strikva in his famous last stand in that game, like I don't think that Strikva would have been able to do that without the athleticism. That there would have been a different outcome, that more people would have gotten mutuals with them, and then they would have died out of the game much sooner. But like I think it may go both ways. Like, some players become, I think, really good at positioning because they don't have the athleticism to have those athletic options open to them. But at the same time, you're totally right. Some players rely so much on their athleticism, they could really stand to get put in a boot or something like that, where they don't have that option, and or like you're forced to walk this entire game. You're not allowed to use your speed. You have to play by just walking around. We can clip your phaser so you can't do any fancy maneuvers, like whatever that means. Then you are forced to see what Kodama was saying, like game sense and positioning makes up the vast majority of what a player can do. And in that same video, Kodama says that I'm forgetting what exactly he said, but it was like the last 5% of a player is the advanced maneuvering, the athletic positioning, the micro game, um, the fancy tricks essentially.
Yeah. Well,
But
and I think, oh, sorry, good.
go ahead, because I'm gonna pull up something. I just want to make sure I'm getting that right. I don't want to
Oh,
misquote him.
yeah. the thing is I kind of equate a lot of what you're talking
Oh,
about
actually.
to microplay and to mechanical play,
Hmm.
which I
Can I
think
interrupt real quick? So
at the end of the day,
he had said
oh, yeah.
physical ability 15% and mechanical skill 5%.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
Cayman would agree with me a little bit. Like it's definitely something, but please continue.
yeah. Well, I don't think it has no value. And like I said, I feel like there's like a base level. Like you have to be able to play the whole tournament. You know, if you're walking into finals and you're trudging up the ramp, you know, you're not bringing as much value to your team, and you're often hindering them. If you're not able to get around the corner from a missile, you know, that's going to hurt. Um, I think that there is an amount that like you have to be at the top competitive level, but I think beyond that, athleticism is more a component of other things. You know, talking about the ability to maneuver and out shoot people. Um, uh, some players are really good at out shooting people without having to do all that maneuvering. Um, I think of
Right.
Autumn at heavy. Uh, does not move around a lot, but is very talented at putting people down and keeping them out of the resupply without it. Versus some heavy players use that maneuvering in order to do a bunch of weird trick shots and moves in order to fool the people pushing into them in order to get those shots off. Um, and so I think athleticism is something that definitely is beneficial to some players, and their athleticism makes them better. My point was just that I don't think that athleticism as an isolated concept can be used as a comparison between players. Like this player is more athletic than this player, which makes them better in some way. Um, uh, I think that
Oh, I see what you mean.
it's just a component
I
of other
think you
things,
may
if that makes
I
sense.
think you may
Like,
be mishearing me a little bit because I'm not saying
okay,
that one player who's got a six pack is a better laser tag player than another player who doesn't,
mm-hmm.
but it's more about how they use it. Because
Mm-hmm.
under athleticism, I have all these little traits. It involves their shot speed, their reaction speed, their boxing, their pre-firing, their missiling, their missile dodging, their juking, their mind games, their jumping, their squatting, and their physical
Mm-hmm.
endurance. So some people have some of that, and some don't. Like Disco Monkey clearly has endurance. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't have endurance. That's actually an area where Disco Monkey is like, however you want to define. We don't have to use the word athleticism,
Mm-hmm.
but his endurance is a factor that makes him that is a positive asset that I don't have.
Yeah.
You,
It
you,
might be better.
is there a better word that you might use?
Maybe just physical ability might just as a factor. I'm not sure. I think athleticism definitely has a like athleticism creates an image in my mind
Oh, I see.
of like, you know, like a swimmer or something. You
Oh,
know,
I see.
like
Okay.
very like toned, peak condition. You know, and I think there's a degree of that, especially helping. Like Rusty has put a lot of effort into his body and his athleticism, and it shows. He's able to move very well, and he has a lot of endurance. But yeah, I definitely, especially I think talking about, I think Strikva is like a very strong example of somebody who like leans really hard into like their body's physical, like their body's ability and athleticism and his ability to
Mm-hmm.
run just all game long. And so that was kind of where my mind was at. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot of components of physical ability that do matter and do impact a game, and I think a lot of it boils down to actually understanding yourself and knowing what your strength is and putting the effort in. Like you can see a
Mm-hmm.
difference between people who prepare themselves for nets and people who don't.
Mm-hmm. You
Um,
so can absolutely, and I know that from experience. Like I've had to really suffer to get in shape, at least on some level, to in order to do the physical things I need to do to win, or try to
mhm.
win. So
um,
go ahead.
Also, some players are able to really like draw out every ounce of their potential, when it comes down to it. And I
Completely.
think that's something that's important too. There's a lot of players who can run circles around everybody, but they burn themselves out so fast. Um, and, I don't know. I hate using myself as an example too much because I feel weird about it. But Uh, I feel like I've always felt like I'm capable of really pulling everything out in finals, no matter what. Like in finals, I will always give everything into it.
Of course.
Versus, in round play, my athletic and physical ability is, going to be very unimpressive by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even a component where in round play, I actively hinder put the brakes on. I actively don't give, and I understand you should be able to give everything you've got to every game, and you should be able to, it's ideal to be able to just have the endurance to go 100% every game throughout the tournament. But for me, it's not even just a physical thing. There's also mental endurance for me, where if I give everything into every game, and say we lose 5 games in a row where I put all of the stops in, I was running around the arena trying to survive at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I was like doing all sorts of crazy stuff, moving around, sprinting all game long, and 5 games in a row we just lost. Like, I'm going to be very mentally fatigued. I'm going to be very not sick of it, but definitely very drained, very, very tired of it. And so that's something where kind of throughout round play, I'm still playing right. I'm still playing well with intent. I'm giving everything that I can to my team, but I'm not letting myself drain myself to a ridiculous extent. I'll still give everything I can to win the game, but I'm not going to like drain myself for finals. I'm going to make sure that I have everything when I need it, and I'm in the right headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. You're hitting on some things we hit on at the beginning. Like, there's obviously context. What are we asking you to do with your physical ability? Which, let's just call it physical ability now. Are you playing one game right now? Are you playing an entire tournament? And what role are you playing? Because Commander sure has to run a lot more than Medic. That's very consistent. And I think there's a pretty low barrier of entry for a lot of the skills I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Like every single person at that random draw, I'm pretty sure had a really great shot speed and reaction speed. And that came from reps, as we talked about being a really important thing. That's kind of Rusty's calling card. Like, those go hand in hand. Muscle memory. We have quick shot speeds because we've pulled the trigger millions, probably billions of times each, Yeah. Like, our bodies adapt. Our bodies and our minds are heavily connected. If your mental exhaustion will probably result in some lack of physical ability, and lack of physical ability, at least for me, and I bet for others, like at least some, like my mind begins to shut down when my body is exhausted. It's a huge weakness of mine, so I have to be in good physical shape. But other people don't experience that. Disco Monkey's not the first I've heard of. So it's all contextual to the person. And I don't want anybody to hear that you need to be in tip-top physical shape and have a six-pack to be a good laser tag player. Certainly we've had plenty of examples of people who are not quite as fit directly beat players who are fitter than them. That happens every tournament all the time across many situations. But I want to just share 2 little examples in my mind that really exemplify why physical ability can be a game changer, why it can be something that I consider so important that I put it in my top 6. I play against the Fear Turkey a lot. The Fear Turkey is very fast. How about this? Aiden, have you ever played Risk?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever been about to attack a territory where you have like 10 to 15 units and they only have 1 or 2 units? And then they get you all the way down to like 3 or 4 units or stop your attack entirely against all odds? Yep. This is one of the ways that physical ability can change the game greatly. In situations where it's like, okay, I have 1 shot power, they have 1 shot power. This is going to be a mutual. I see them clearly. They're right there. I can definitely land this shot, and they juked me. And they came around that wall so quickly I couldn't even pull the trigger. I've literally just tilted off the planet because I can't do basic game functions against certain really fast players. It's not every time. It's probably like 1 in 20 times that kind of thing happens. But it can definitely become something that changes the game. And the other story I want to say, you mentioned like it's something that the top players often like get really in shape. I remember watching the finals games in Nats 23. The matchup against Rusty and Kodama, both on heavy, was really intense to watch. And I could have pictured myself, had I been in one of their shoes trying to play against one of them, I could have easily seen myself trying to play heavy and not even getting my shot off by the time I come around the wall. I would already be down and they would be running past me into my team. It's like if you don't have the physical ability, especially in face-to-face situations, sometimes you just get beat. So yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I disagree with you in a very roundabout way. I think that there is a lot of I think that there is value to it. But I would very sparingly use athleticism personally in the way that I judge a player's value. And again, it's one of those components where there's kind of outliers too. Like there are some players that are just so incredibly fast that they can have some value, some very unique value, specifically from that. And there's some players that like how we were talking with the got missiled stat. There's some players that will struggle in the field and could hurt your team's performance because they're just not able to maneuver, and they are going to get penalized penalized. We have refs, so maybe that's not the right word, but punished very heavily for it. Especially because of like the way that the game works, specifically talking about backtracks. Being able to make a backtrack effectively is very important. And I think that is probably the number one case that I have for the value of athleticism. The number of times that I just built up advantages over enemy heavies in the Loveland Nats because they were too slow to make a backtrack, it was significant. And it's kind of an instance where maybe there's other play that you could do around it, but really being able to make a backtrack effectively is really important, especially in fields where people can run around all over the place, like Syracuse. There's a lot of parallel pathing in Syracuse, and so it might sometimes feel pointless to make a backtrack, but it still is important. It still is important to be able to go and create space for yourself from at least one angle. And if you aren't able to do that, if somebody's able to just kind of run all over the place and tag everybody and come back to you before you're effectively protecting yourself, that's an issue. And so for me, you talked about the dueling, but for me, the backtracking is very specifically like where the athleticism comes into play for me. And then even the other end of the backtracking, if you're able to get in on somebody before they're able to make a backtrack, that's also that can also be very impactful.
I think we both made our points. Yeah. So those are my main 6, and I know you're not trying to stay up too late, so I kind of throw in my last 4 just kind of quick.
Yeah.
So to reiterate, my main 6 traits that I look for are the game sense awareness, playmaking, adaptability, reps, positioning, and physical ability. But I have 3 here that I consider specifically for tournaments, especially Nats, but I would consider it also for a random draw, a situation where you are going to be working together with this player over the course of many games. One is growth mindset. Growth mindset is you take accountability, you are actively improving, you're asking questions, you're willing to take feedback. An example that seems to be relevant is Ender from your team, who was watching our videos and taking feedback from you and Kodama. Anything you'd say on growth mindset? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree on it. And actually, I'm gonna touch on Ender because I love playing with him so much.
Please.
Um, um, we had a game in finals where he rolled heavy on green side, and he had only played one heavy game the entire tournament. And in Syracuse, heavy experience is very important. It really, you really have to learn what it is you're supposed to do. And I took him over. I said, all right, we need like a minute, and I took him over and I gave him the fastest briefing on how to play green heavy in Syracuse I possibly could have. I just super fast, just blasting out a ton of points of like what to do, where to stand, what's going on, what the goal is, and how to defend. And he played a phenomenal green heavy that game. He soaked it up so fast and was positioning so well and just absorbed all the info and just picked it up so well. And that like ability to learn, ability to listen and to like process the information and absorb it and then apply it is that's a talent in and of itself.
It completely is. I would think it was the biggest separator Ender had from all the other people in that tier. I don't know about the other people's growth mindset, but like that is a perfect example of a growth mindset. He was teachable, coachable. He was propped up by the experience you were giving him and the team was giving him, and he became so much better just from that. If I'm going to play a tournament with someone, I want them to be willing to take feedback and grow and have that humility. It will make a world of difference. The second trait is generally I want a team player. Someone who is thinking about themselves as part of a larger organization rather than just looking at their stats, their role, what's in it for them. An example I'm going to use is Snuffles. In Nats, Snuffles played whatever the team needed him to be as a scout. He was attacking in sync with his commander. He was defending the resupply. He was thinking very like macro and where do I need to be right now for my team. In this most recent tournament, he completely shifted his play style and he was exactly what Caleb needed as his heavy. He would take feedback from Caleb and be willing to like as his partner, change up his strategy and do what he knew other people needed him to do. I love a team player. It's a mindset that makes it less about you and more about the success of everybody.
Team play is very important. This is a team game, and the whole team is what makes it happen. Especially as as the competition gets closer and gets more fierce, it's going to come down to the teams. It's not going to come down to individual players just wrecking everybody else because they just are better than every other player in the game. It's not staff member playing against a kid's birthday party at laser tag situation.
Yeah, you don't need to be a team player there. Honestly, the biggest situation I see where you need team players is kind of the opposite. Like if someone is not a team player, the biggest situation that it destroys a team is when like someone will not play a position that they don't want to play. It's like, hey, I know you like commander, it's not working, or our heavy's really struggling, we need you on heavy, or you're just not cutting it, you're injured, we need you on medic, or like whatever it might be. And they're like, either they won't do it, or when they do it, they try half effort and sabotage the team so they can get back to what they want. So toxic, and it will destroy teams. Everyone needs to be willing to do what's best for the group.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the main talks we had in preparation for New Zealand Nats 23 was building a team with the ability to do whatever we needed to do to adjust. And one of those things was the ability to move people around positions, and which is part of how I ended up on ammo. I don't think the original thought was ever for me to play ammo. definitely there was a lot of leaning towards me playing Scout, which I didn't want. I wasn't too excited about playing Scout in the Nats, but not that I feel like I'm too good for it. I had some reasons at the time to believe that Scout was my worst position, and I still think it was at the time. Now I feel really confident on Scout, but yeah, we were practicing and we were looking at stuff, and we're like, the way that's shaking up, like we should I said, hey, we should consider running me on ammo and Thunder on Scout, and it worked. And so being able to like make those adjustments and being willing to do whatever the team needs is really important. And honestly, this is an instance where like I kind of have a hard time empathizing with players who don't see the same way as me here, because I don't understand the desire to play like commander in a losing situation versus playing resupply and your team winning. Like, to me, I'm like, hey, give me a role in the team and I'll do it, and we can win and it'll be fun and I'll be happy. It'll be great.
Well, I can tell you, it's ego. And that's the same thing for growth mindset. Like, if a person has ego, their self-worth is dependent on how they perceive themselves in the context of laser tag. They're the kind of player where they don't actually want the team to win necessarily. They just want to look really good. They come out and they look at their score and then don't even look at all the other 11 scores. They're like, okay, I looked really good. I did really well. I'm the commander. That's a high status position. I'm the best player on my team. Whatever it might be. Their motives are completely warped. And it sucks. I've been that player. My teammates could tell you essentially from like 2015 to 2017, I needed to be in charge. I needed to be the commander. I needed people to respect me because I didn't respect myself. But I got broke in Sacramento, so thank you.
Was it me shooting you in the boot?
I
assume not.
I didn't have a boot. You had the boot, but I remember you sprinting after my butt in a boot, which is terrifying. Like, what is this place?
Oh, the boot. Oh gosh, the sad memories. My one and only tournament in that arena, and it was in a boot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh well. Yeah. Ego's a funny thing, and in a way, ego and pride drives a lot of players and drives them to growth.
Mm-hmm.
And then in some ways, it can hold them back.
Yeah.
So, and I think part of the rough thing about it too is there is like I think a very fundamental desire in all of us, and maybe I'm overreaching by saying all of us, but I assume it's all of us, to get recognition for what we've done, and recognition for what we've accomplished, and there's a lot of good things that you can do in the game that won't get acknowledged and won't get recognition, which I think is where there's definitely players and instances of stat chasing tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's like the biggest issue in the scene, but it's there, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not. And I think a lot of that is because that is like the most solid way to get recognition and say, hey, look, there's proof that I did something. Even if it wasn't the best thing for your team, you could say, look, I had the top MVP. I had the most medic hits. I had the biggest heavy score of the tournament. And it's great that we have the stats. It's better to have the stats than to like not, because there might be issues sometimes with people. But that is an unfortunate side effect of this discussion we're having about like the immeasurables, is that it is easiest to evaluate players based on the numbers. And so when people want recognition, the numbers are the first thing to go after. And if you're worried about not getting recognition for your play because of the numbers, keep playing and know that there's some of us here who are watching. I'm not just looking at the Loveland stats, okay? I'm hitting that replay beta button or I'm tuning into those Twitch streams, and I'm like, there's some interesting things going on here where the scout puts down the heavy and then the commander gets in.
Crazy.
Look at how good these resupply players are at doubling people. Oh, look at how this ammo put the medic down and the medic got away after the enemy commander got in and the medic didn't lose any lives. That's a valuable skill that won't go on the stats. There's people watching, and especially at tournaments, I think those like team play components will show for a lot of people, and they'll give you a lot of value with the people around you too. Like when I play with a good team player, it is such a phenomenal feeling. Like the team that I just played on in Syracuse, I would play with any one of them again. Like they're not the best players in the world. I'm not the best player in the world. There's nothing being like, oh, they're infinitely better than anybody else, and that's why I'd play with them. It's that I went and played with them. They were all reasonable. I could ask them to do things for us, and they would do it. And it was a good time. No one was forsaking the team to like do their own stuff, and it's great. And that was like kind of the main thing. I was really excited when I saw I was on Kodama's team, because I know that A, we have pretty good synergy together, and B, I've played with Kodama enough. I know that I'm going to be able to just go play with Kodama, and he's not going to be like, screw you, Odin. I'm going to go do my own thing and get my own stats. I could be like, hey, I need you to do this. And he'd be like, all right. He may not be happy about it,
but you're a team, darn it.
Yeah. It's something that is very valued. I think, especially as like, I think there's been a lot of talk and a lot of like theory going into actually building teams and designing teams and picking players lately. And I think as more and more of that generates, the more value there will be in players that are known to be able to fill roles, known to support, known to be reliable, especially because, there's going to be some stand-up players, some playmakers like Slaughtermelon, like Scythe, who are known to really take charge in a game and kind of accomplish things. But those players are going to want people that they feel they can rely on too. Like it's hard to be a playmaker if your whole team is forsaking you. So there's a lot of value. Don't feel like you're pigeonholed into chasing stats to get recognition. It might take a little longer, but those other values are very highly regarded still. When people are actually in a position to see them, which is why you'll get more well understood as you continue going to tournaments and participating in events and playing with people.
You are so spot on, and I'm so glad you're saying this. And I'm sorry that we're gonna keep going on, because now I'm gonna nerd out a little bit. But that's part of why I've noted all these players that I want to specifically name for each of these. And anytime anyone has called me out in a positive way, even just somebody saying "Go Mischief" in the Twitch chat, or "Go Loveland" in the Twitch chat, even if I don't even know the person, it just feels like $1 million. People definitely want recognition. That's a normal, healthy thing that we all want. The hard thing about sports is like I think going to play a sport, especially one where you're being publicly watched, like there's something rather primal about this whole thing. Like you're putting, there's no like equality here. We all come with our own traits and our different experience levels, and it's just not like, it's not fair when you're going to compete and you're putting yourself out there, and for you to lose games or play poorly, like there can be some deep-seated like feelings about yourself and all that. Like, man, I failed. I let my team down. I'm not very good at this. I made a mistake that cost my team, or what does that say about me? I could go on, and I actually made a whole like 2.5 hour therapy session video on the channel, if you go way back, that talks about overcoming ego. Because like you got to get at those roots. It's okay to want recognition, but I want just very briefly, like I want to challenge people's hearts. Like, what do you love? Do you love the recognition more than you love just the game? Can you just come and enjoy the game for the sake of the game? Can you relish playing Space Marines 5 because it's like a really cool sport and you're with all your friends? even if you're losing, or do you have to win? Is the game completely ruined because you didn't win? What about the people on the other team? It's okay if they lose, but not you. That says a lot about you, you know. I just don't beat around the bush with this kind of thing. Like, people are more important than the game. I think people who chase, I think people who give into their ego, chase stats at the expense of other people, are gonna wind up with a bunch of trophies and a lot of regrets. Realizing that, like, you might have been the villain of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think people, you know, we're a pretty small community, so we're pretty close to each other. You know, like it's pretty intimate. Like we the people who keep going to tournaments, I feel pretty close to all of them. And I think that there's also an extent of, like, you know, I think people want to be understanding of each other, and so, you know, it's easy to, like, beat around the bush with it, but there's definitely players who are too obsessed with, and always has been since the existence of stats, too obsessed with stats. Players who the only thing they're looking at after every game is their personal stats. They're not analyzing the game. They're not thinking about things that could have been done different. They're looking at their numbers and they're like, oh yes, my numbers. And, you know, there, you know, I've played on some SAC B teams, and that's been a problem on those teams on occasion, was players who were a little too obsessed with their own performance and were even very vocal about forsaking the rest of the team and saying, no, I will do what I need to in order to look the best. And that's not good. That's not good for anybody. And I don't think any of them really ended up being happy, even when they got good stats, even when they got high MVP and stuff. I'd like maybe a little momentary reward, but they didn't seem satisfied with the game.
No, yeah, because you have to keep proving that you're good enough.
Yeah,
when you're not good enough for yourself.
Right. Because when you're getting the value from the numbers, you can't ever let the numbers drop.
Yep.
But, you know, people have bad games. I've had some phenomenally bad games. So just straight up impressively terrible games. But I don't think it makes me any worse as a player, especially because those games happened and I looked at them and I said, oh, wow, these things happened and I need to do things differently in the future. And that's, you know, we totally, you know, went off on a little mini mental health tangent. But,
oh, I love it.
You know, that's it. And I think mental health is also kind of an important value of a player.
1,000%.
I know this is, you know, this can be a touchy subject sometimes, but, you know, players with like instability or volatility issues are going to be less valuable in a team because you can't trust them and you can't rely on them to perform through a finals. And that's really what a lot of this breaks down to, is like you need to feel value in your players so that you can trust them, because that trust is so important. And even if you have like the most volatile player on your team and they have no breakdown throughout finals, but you feel like you're walking on eggshells around them and you have to do everything to cater to them, it's going to hamper the team. It's going to be harder to play with them. So.
And I would just say, like, it's a skill you can learn if you have any volatility. The thing is that Space Marines is a game with incredibly high stimulus. People who have had like, you know, it can give people mental problems, the game itself, because you're simulating combat, and we go in and we yell at each other and you create some like really powerful memories together. I have cried and bled and sweat and felt it all. Like, it's been a very emotional ride. But this is also a place where people go to learn how to manage their emotions well. And I think a person who's earnestly trying can absolutely improve.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got to say that as a mental health professional. And if I can add one more thing to all this, I have to, because I'm potentially being a little hypocritical when I'm saying like people are more important than the game after this last Nats, where I kind of mentioned how I hardly really spoke to many people and I wasn't very focused on other people having fun. I was focused on winning. I was still a team player for my team, but I was a team player. In no way was I sabotaging the team. There were some ways where I could have given my attention to other things too much, but I wouldn't say that I was like bullying people or going out of my way to be mean. I was just, I was just a little more focused on the game. That's how I'd put it. I last couple here. So one thing for a tournament I really admire, I think, is a great factor. There's a lot, but I had to put this one almost as a favorite. Obsession. I love a player who's obsessed with Space Marines 5. I don't want a player who gets tired of talking about the games, or they aren't actively engaged during team meetings, or they get tired halfway through the week and they're on their phone a lot. I want players who are helping to win the tournament all week long because they love it, and you can't get them to stop thinking about the game. It can be such a demoralization when like you care and you see that other people have stopped caring.
What kind of nerd is obsessed with laser tag?
Us.
Yeah, and to me, I agree with the obsession thing. To me, the main point for teammates boils down to engagement. I want them to be engaged in the discussions. I want them to be listening at the very least, and I want them to engage in any content. If we're like, hey, look at this game, we need to analyze this game, I want them to be there. If we say, hey, we drew out this play for the opening, this is how we want to position ourselves for the opening of the game, they need to be looking at that and like committing to it. Otherwise it's kind of a letdown. Like you're putting expectations in the players to be committed, to be engaged, to be present, and when they're not, it's like, okay, well, this is like a role that everybody on the team has, is to be committed to each other. I've been on some very theoretically strong teams in the past that fell apart because when it came time to sit down at the table and talk about the game, nobody wanted to talk about the game.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wanted to break down what went wrong. Nobody wanted to talk about what needed to change. Conversations were very short. Everyone is very curt with each other. What needs to be different? You have to do better. Well, what does that look like? I don't know. Shoot more people. Okay, that's good way
advice.
To.
That's exactly what you need to do. Why didn't you just shoot more people?
If we all shoot 100% more people and get shot 100% less, we'll win the game.
Boom.
Easy. But yeah,
no,
that
totally right.
Actual engagement is so important, and yeah, being engaged with the team and being engaged with the game. When you come out of a game, you should be able to break it down to an extent. I don't expect everyone to be able to remember every aspect. I get a little crazy. I get a little super crazy about games where I'm like, if I come out of a game where I'm like really serious, like, okay, we have to like do something different. We have to learn what went wrong in this game. I'm going to very obsessively be like, okay, what was the story of each of the players on this team? Like, what was like their perspective? I don't expect every player to do that. I honestly, it's probably too much anyways, but I just love it. I just love doing that. But like, at least be able to come out and be like, okay, we struggled when they sent both 3 hits forward. That was rough. That was a point in the game that we faltered. At least be able to break down points of the game, which requires you to be engaged in the game itself too. I've played with players who you try to talk to them after the game and they don't recall anything that happened. You're like, remember when the 3 chain dropped? They're like, there was a 3 chain? Yeah. The thing that put you on 2 lives? Like, how do you not know that this happened? A lot of times, it's more common at members nights where people are kind of going in and playing the game to play and have fun, which is totally reasonable. But at a tournament, you have to be really like aware of what's going on, and you have to be just engaged. You have to be invested in all of it. You have to be willing to talk.
Yeah, with obsession comes engagement. And yeah, if I'm choosing between two players to put on my team, and one of them is a little better than the other, but the less experienced player is more obsessed with the game, while the other one's like, yeah, I'd like to go. Meh. I know they're going to be disengaged. I think that my obsessed player will be better than my unobsessed player by the end of the tournament, because they're going to grow that much and make that much use of all the experience.
Yeah,
the people that I noted, the Resupply, are obsessed with laser tag. DK, guy next door, Than, you see that like it's obviously been able to keep them playing for years and years and years. And if you talk to them about Space Marines, they all lean in. They're all like, ooh, what strategy are you coming up with? What are you thinking about the game? Oh, they love it. I'd love to play on a team with any of them. Okay.
Yeah.
My final one, and I promised you a Bromley story.
Yes, you did.
Okay. So those three that I just named were tournament X Factors. This is my one member night X Factor. Because we build teams for Nats. These are the big tournaments. But week by week, what's really going on most of the time is I am drafting players sitting in the briefing room for my members night game. You know? I rock, paper, scissors the other captain, and we go into it and we start picking players, and then we're going to pick positions or random positions. And one of the factors that I personally will reach on to get players who might be less experienced is effort. I want a player who is very, very competitive and going to give me 100% effort this game. When you're playing in a tournament, generally, everybody always gives 100%, at least 90. So I don't worry about this so much in tournaments, but I think it's worth mentioning that in members nights, the value of the players in the room fluctuates gigantically, because there are some people who drop 1 or 2 tiers in terms of their gameplay because they're not going to try super hard if it's not a tournament. But there's a couple players in particular that I know are always going to be like obsessive about winning, even a casual game. The Rook and Brahmatized. Bromley cannot stand when we go easy or try to take a quote-unquote chill game. You just can't turn it off. It's not fun for him. He's always out to win. And I want to show you this example. So I was playing against Bromley. We had set up a game where it was me versus Brahmatized Commander, and we had 2 very new players as our heavies. They were going to run their new player heavy, and I took my heavy into the arena. It was literally their first night of playing, just this last Wednesday. I took the heavy into the arena. I showed him, okay, so you're going to run up this ramp, you're going to go to this spot on the top floor, and you're just going to focus ahead at the other heavy. I just want you to focus on keeping that heavy out. You know, I gave him a very simple job because it's his first night of playing Space Marines and he's playing heavy weapons. I want to keep his goals just like pretty linear. And then the game starts. He runs up to the top, and Brahmatized had pulled a slaughter melon. He had double rushed my newbie heavy on the top floor, sent him packing downstairs, and put 2 missiles into me, and then immediately bum rushed us downstairs while my other heavy was trying to figure out what on earth was going on. Medikit after medikit after medikit. Canceled my nuke with a nuke on nuke cancel. Just sprinting, and I need to find the stats because he definitely beat the heck out of me. So I'm not saying he didn't earn this win, but he tagged my heavy. He tagged my heavy weapons a shameless 24 times and put 2 missiles into him. Bromley won that game because he just wanted to win, and he was going to do whatever it took to do it. That's how that giant commander game happened. Like, he destroyed us.
He wanted the win.
He wanted the win much more than I did.
and wanting the win is also a specific value, like drive and motivation.
Completely.
You gotta want it.
There's a certain archetype, I think, of a challenger. It's a player who either hasn't won Nats or for whatever reason really wants to win the Nats. It's just a little different when you haven't had it before, when you haven't had that taste. Like, some people are just really hungry, and it's an X factor in their gameplay. And I think in a Nat situation, like, I think like in a members night, Bromley usually gets a boost for me because not everyone's willing to play like that. And I have to respect it. But man, I always want to have the Rook and Brahmatized on my team in members night. So yeah, those are my 10 traits. I'm pretty much done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And then we each have a bajillion qualities that we could talk about.
Yeah, anything you want to throw in?
I want to throw one in. I want to throw one in that's a little weird, maybe a little unorthodox. And this is something that actually comes up when discussing meta, which is, for those who don't know, kind of like the standard of play in different games, like kind of the standard approach to the game.
What'd you call it?
At any given time. And so this factor is matchups. In the same vein, so in other games where you like in video games where you have multiple characters that you can choose from, something like League of Legends, at any time, certain characters might be significantly stronger than other characters. And so they'll be well picked because they're stronger. At the same time, there might be characters that are weaker than the bar. They're weaker than they maybe should be. But because they happen to be counters or strong matchups to the meta picks, the strong picks, they actually get a value increase despite being weaker because they have enough prevalence in the game. And so something that I think can actually contribute to a player is kind of their matchups. I think there are some players who might overall, over 1,000 randomly generated games, might win less on average, might perform not as well, but because they happen to be strong into the players that they'll be playing against, or the types of players that you'll be playing against, or the way that people are playing at the time, they actually gain more value. And this is something that is a lot more easily observed at members nights, I feel. At Sacramento, for the longest time, DK matched teams, and he always matched by players because we had tiers and he would generally balance the tiers, but he would know, okay, in this position, this player is actually able to play well against this other player. Even though it might theoretically be a weaker team, it should balance out. And so being able to see kind of like those small things where it's like, okay, well, like this player is able to battle this other player a tier or two higher than them in certain positions because their play style happens to just be an effective counter. And then that even lends into tournament play. If you are playing against like very aggressive teams and you have a player, somebody who comes to mind is Guy Next Door, who's like a rock. Like he's able to really just hold the fort. And so, you're able to just let the enemy team just bang their heads on the wall over and over, and he'll hold the ground. Even if he might not be the strongest pick overall, not to say that I love you, G&D. I'm not trying to say anything bad. I'm just using you as an archetype.
Archetype.
Even if hypothetically he's not, the best pick overall, he might be a phenomenal pick for the circumstance. If you really need somebody who's able to like lock down the back line and hold the fort against these very aggressive players, that increases his value. His value increases in those circumstances. And so that's kind of that's probably like the weirdest and most unorthodox, I think, of the points we're talking about in this episode. But I really think that matchups have like a great weight on people's value.
And I think that kind of lends into play styles too. You know, like for example, people who are super solo carry focused won't perform as well at the top level at Nats because they're too obsessed with their own performance. You know, and so it's a rough environment for them. It's kind of like the same thing with matchups where it's like, okay, well, maybe maybe having somebody in the midfield who is kind of like a staple presence, their good field control is going to be weaker against a scout that's very fast and going to outmaneuver them and run circles around them and be able to really effectively push them out of the area so that they can't do that. Being able to kind of like see what players bring to the table and how effective it will be is also important. You know, it's not just how skilled they are at what they're doing, but what are they doing? Is that going to be what you need on your team? Is that what you're going to need in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels a little cheating to bring that up because we are trying to do this across like all contexts. That's extremely contextual, of course, but
oh yeah,
it's a good point. And you know, doing one of these on team building might be really interesting as well. It's just like, okay, we can value players certain ways, but you know, what situations can we get the most out of players? When you talk about synergy, it's like some players increase the value of other players, and then you can get a team that is worth more than the sum of its parts. And some teams are good against certain other types of teams. With the meta you're talking about and the counter picking you're talking about. I've had I don't know if any of you remember, if you remember Izzy. Izzy came out to Detroit in 2019. Isaac. He's one of those players who he's got a really great mind for the game, but he was never able to like put what he wanted to do out onto the field super well. So he was sometimes a little clunky in his play, but he was a really good teammate. And anyway, one day I was playing heavy against him. I thought, okay, this is going to be a total smash. What Izzy chose to do was basically just sit in his base and wait for me to try to come over and then do this super just right in step shot to come out and shoot me down. And then I'd be like, okay, that didn't work. I'll try again. And he kept me out for like literally 6 or 7 attempts. Whatever he was doing, whatever the way he was moving, I could not out predict him, and he just walled me out. And obviously this was like a kind of a mismatch. His commander was destroying my team the whole time. And it was just the fact that like, however it is I tended to attack, Izzy was a counter pick for me. And even in that one role, in that one moment, he was above my skill level on the scoreboard, and I got wrecked by him. And that can happen in so many different situations.
Yeah. I want to go in just to throw into the matchup story time.
Oh, keep going, because if we hit 3 hours, that'd be really funny.
My biggest instance in Sacramento. So eventually I reached like the top tier of players in Sacramento for matchmaking purposes. And my biggest problem always when I was playing Commander was when Autumn was on heavy on the enemy team, and she was, I think, it might have been two tiers below me, technically in the tiers, but I just couldn't play against her when she played heavy. Like the way that she played, it was infuriating to me. I was like, I can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just stuck here. And yeah, so, you know, it was a little cheeky. It was a little cheeky, but I really wanted to throw matchups in here because, you know, I feel like we were talking about a lot of like very standard qualities and stuff, which I think is good. But I wanted to throw something in, you know, to be like, hey, there's a lot of variables out there, and the variables are important to consider.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. The variables are important, and I think that if we go back to where this conversation even began, there was a random draw where players are going to be, you know, thrown in, no consideration for the synergy of the teams. We were just trying to rank them, or people were trying to rank them by just how do you generally, in a vacuum, view this player. And then, of course, we got context, and suddenly many players rose and fell. Context is king.
Yeah. That was actually one, that was actually something where before the tournament started, I was actually talking to some people about matchups. I'm like, you can look at especially the top 2 tiers, and if you've had experience playing tournaments with these players, you could, at least I could, envision them playing against each other and see like the matchups. Like if these are supposed to be like the cores of the team and valued so high because they're supposed to be able to carry their team to a win and supposed to be able to like take the lead and be like a staple player, then they should be able to battle each other, and what does that head to head look like? And I felt like that was kind of an important part of like where, I was expecting players to end up and where I was expecting like maybe some issues with the rankings or where they could have been shuffled up a little. At the end of the day, I think the top 2 were kind of just the top 2 tiers. And that was, I think that was kind of fine. There was a lot of very good players at that tournament. And so I don't think that shuffling up the top 2 tiers really does a whole lot. But, definitely I think there was a bit of like, hey, some of these players might be a little better at beating up all the other players on here. And that might factor into some things, but yeah. I don't want to drag this on for 3 hours, and I've had to pee for a while, so.
Oh my goodness. Yep, tell the people the truth. I love it. I love it.
Urinate. We're pissing hard.
All right. Well, then to wrap this up, what is one thing, Odin, that you want people to take away from this discussion?
Oh, you first.
Shoot, context is king.
Oh, damn, that's what I was going to say.
And Odin thinks that MVP is the #1 stat that you should use to evaluate a player's value.
Oh yeah, that's my one thing. Is MVP is the most important. No, yeah, context is king. That's really it. But there's value to stats. Just it's not everything.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we'll wrap up here. Thank you for coming on, Odin.
Sure.
And
Thanks for having me.
everyone, good luck out there evaluating your players. Let me know if you have comments.
Comment, subscribe, like, hit that bell.
Do it.
Venmo Luke $20.
Yes. Please.